Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Mark Pearson, Chairman of, no, I used to be, Chairman of Children and Family Law and Oversight and the thing on the courts. I'm introducing House Bill 1013 relative to amending the definition of temporary alimony.
Thank you very much, Representative. Does anyone else wish to testify on this legislation? Seeing none, we'll end the hearing. That was the quickest one I've ever had. Woo. At least a few.
We'll be back.
Okay. Tea? Are you both getting tea? No, I'm good. Thank you. Do, 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 do. Huh. Thank you. Just take out the member from the Senate. All these bills would be fine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's such a good thing that your committee and I can actually meet without rushing back and forth simultaneously to each other's conference rooms. I was asked by NAMI to present this bill. Many states have been in the process of reforming their competency restoration system, and it seemed good both to NAMI and also to a wide political spectrum of my co-sponsors. If you take a look at them, it really does cover a spectrum that we might do the same. Now, I'm not so much a content guy as I am a process guy, so thank you, NAMI, for the content, but I'm looking at the process, and I discovered maybe an amendment might be needed. And it addresses two process issues. Number one is the membership of the committee in the bill as originally filed. Originally, the bill would have established a very large committee of membership with lots of stakeholders and representative of agencies as members. Last session, I think we passed into law a bill that said we really couldn't do that. Now, I know there's been workarounds. I remember one bill reading, notwithstanding the law that we just passed, we're going to do it anyway. I mean, it was a little nicer than that, but that's what they meant. And I concluded, now we probably shouldn't do that. There was probably a good reason why they said what they did. My amendment removed those stakeholders and agency representatives from committee status, but I wanted them, their titles, their offices, their agencies kept in the bill, because that would be a reminder we need to hear at least from these people. Don't forget one or the other. So by putting it in the bill, these people would be ones especially the committee, when established, would want to hear from. Secondly, I have chaired the DHHS Oversight Committee for 4 years now, and I know that even we legislators are sometimes absent, which is why DHHS Oversight has two alternates. And they're people who love the subject, people who show up, and that's good because very often one or both of them have to be called up to regular status, so we have a quorum in case we have to vote on anything.
Oh, sorry.
And this bill will do both. This bill will cut the membership down, but not at the expense of forgetting the important people we want to hear from. It also establishes an extra in case. Also, it's not in the written testimony, but in talking with Ms. Stevens, restoration to competency is important. I was asked by the Chief Justice to be part of a small group that is going to work to establish a mental health court in New Hampshire. I went to a meeting where we heard two of the judges of one of the mental health courts that is held in great regard talk to us for a day on how that is working. We plan on taking a road trip pretty soon to go see that group on the ground. This certainly wishes to help individuals whose reason for committing a crime was at least in part because of mental health issues, so that maybe if those issues are addressed, they wouldn't do it again or do something like it again. And people say, where's the justice in that? Well, the justice of those victims in the second and third and fourth event would have justice because there might not be a second and third and fourth event if mental health courts help people get treatment that they need. But in order to have that happen, somebody's got to be restored to competency in the eyes of the court. So this bill will get a committee going that will help in numbers of ways, but one of which will be enabling those folks to participate in mental health court, which might change for the better the outcome next time. So that's my testimony, and I'd be happy to take any questions, but knowing that the content people are behind me.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. I'm going to deviate from the list at this point. Representative DeSimone, who chaired, who filed a piece of legislation, was not aware that the hearing was today. She just happened to be here. So I'm going to allow her to testify on House Bill 1013, knowing very well that her testimony will be included in the bill file on House Bill 1013. Representative, if you can come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to the committee for your indulgence. I appreciate it, and I apologize for my miscommunication of my own volition. Representative Mark Pearson opened the bill, and for just knowledge purposes, I'm Deborah D. Simone, representing Rockingham 14 Atkinson. I filed this bill because we had a lot of constituents coming forward to speak to us concerning the facts that when there's a breakdown in the marriage, somebody walks out the door and somebody's left behind to pay all the bills. And there's no time to try to figure out sometimes how the bills are going to get paid, how the kids are going to get fed right away, if there are kids. This legislation offers predictable orders, and it fosters a settlement. And that's what we, I believe, look to the courts for, is to foster a settlement between two people who sometimes just cannot agree on specifics of the breakdown of the marriage. So I'm asking for you to consider this bill to assist people in a very difficult time in their life to come to a settlement with the court's intervention and make things a little bit easier in the transition to a new life. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
For your question, your testimony. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to switch gears and we're going to go back to House Bill 1020, and the chair will call Holly Stevens.
Good afternoon,
Good
Chairperson and members of the committee. My name is Holly Stevens. I'm the Director of Public Policy for NAMI New Hampshire, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI New Hampshire is a nonprofit grassroots organization whose mission is to improve the lives of all people impacted by mental illness and suicide through support, education, and advocacy. On behalf of NAMI New Hampshire, I'm here today to speak in support of House Bill 1020. As you heard, NAMI New Hampshire did ask Representative Pearson to sponsor this bill because currently in New Hampshire, there is no formal restoration process for folks that are found incompetent to stand trial. As you heard, somebody who's found not competent to stand trial cannot participate in the mental health courts, which is something that we're trying to work on to get statewide in the court, because you have to be able to give informed consent in order to be able to participate in the mental health court, just as you would in the drug courts. And somebody who's found not competent to stand trial is not able to provide that informed consent. And it also requires an understanding of the criminal justice process, which somebody who's found not competent to stand trial, that's the main crux of not being found competent to stand trial, means that you don't understand the judicial process and you can't aid in your own defense. Nationwide, about 81% of individuals that are found not competent to stand trial are later go on to be restored and actually have their court process go through. In New Hampshire, only less than half of the folks that are found not competent to stand trial actually get restored and then are able to have their court cases heard. In 2019, only 44% of individuals in New Hampshire were restored and were able to have their court cases heard. In NAMI New Hampshire's experience in working with families and the loved ones of these individuals, the families see this as a missed opportunity. They see it as a missed opportunity for their family members to receive treatment And a lot of these folks end up going on to be homeless, commit other crimes, or otherwise hospitalized. So if they were able to receive treatment, restoration treatment, which is different than regular treatment, then they would be able to go on to lead productive lives. And the other thing that I want to bring up is sometimes in these cases, there's somebody on the other side of that. There's a victim that's involved. And after a year, if somebody is not restored, those charges are dropped and they never face the charges. And sometimes, we're talking about theft, which is, some people would consider a victimless crime. There's not somebody really on the other side of that who is affected by the crime. But there are times when there is somebody who is really affected by the crime. And in those cases, that person never gets closure and they never see justice. And they may go on to experience their own mental health concerns if the court case doesn't go to fruition. So because of those reasons, we are urging the committee to support this bill. It is a study committee. It was, as you heard, turned from a study commission into a committee. And I did just want to point out that although there is a long list of suggested folks for the committee to consult, it is a may, not a shall. So it doesn't tell the committee that they have to consult those folks. We just thought it would be good to have a roadmap so that they would know the people that were involved in case they wanted to contact them and have them come testify in front of the committee to look at getting a restoration system in New Hampshire so that we can get more folks restored and get their court cases heard. And with that, I will end my testimony and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the chair will call Aaron Cregan.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Erin Cregan, General Counsel, Judicial Branch. Testifying as close to support as the judicial branch can ever be on a matter that is ultimately your determination, because this promises to have expert work to produce more guidance for the judiciary on what to do and to formalize our restoration processes. And that is something that we certainly could use and would absolutely implement. There is a lack of formality in the restoration process, and that does produce lower restoration outcomes than you may see in other states. As Chairman Pearson correctly noted, mental health is a particular passion of the current Chief Justice, and it is something that he asked me to come and convey his interest in having more legislative guidance on restoration. And thank you for your attention to this subject.
Thank you for your testimony this afternoon, Ms. Cregan. Are there any questions for the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 1020? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Well, not quite, but we're getting there. Thank you. If people want to speak, why? Okay, I do not see Representative Spillane, so I am going to call, first, let me open the public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing on House Bill 1189 and recognize Representative Deb DeSimone to introduce the bill. The prime sponsor is not available.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. I guess it's kind of payback. I wasn't here for one, now I get to pay back another representative. For the record again, my name is Deborah D. Simone. I represent Rockingham 14, Atkinson. So I'm going to open this bill for Representative Spillane, who came to me, and we spoke quite a bit about his issue with the fact that he pays child support, and he works a job where he gets paid every couple of weeks. So there are multiple times in the year where he appears to be in arrears. So at one point, he was applying to renew his passport and denied. He was absolutely denied a passport to go from the United States into Canada for his job. This was not a vacation, this was a job, and now he can't go to the main office, which means that he could lose his job. And the reason was that he was behind. So the federal standards are that you must be $2,500 in arrears before the state of New Hampshire would report that you were in arrears. And when you fall below that $2,500, you would then be taken off that reporting. That never happened. There were a multitude of assumptions as to why that never happened in the reporting process. But the point is, it was. So we asked the department why this would happen, how many people this happens to. The surprise is that this man's child support is garnished. So the state of New Hampshire garnishes his wages, puts it in an account, and pays his ex-wife the child support. There's something wrong with that process as far as I can see. If his wages are garnished, he's working a full-time job, they're garnishing his wages every single pay period, yet he falls behind. And then they report him to the federal government and refuse to give him a passport so he can keep said job. So I did a little checking, and I asked our committee researcher to check the Division of Child Support for the answers. And my questions, there were just two, simple. How many individuals in the last 24 months have been reported to the federal government because they met or exceeded the $2,500 in child arrears threshold when their wages were garnished? The answer is the total number of individuals included on those federal collections debtor file in the last 24 months based on file submissions for January 2022 to January 2024 reporting periods whose arrearages exceeded or met were 12,087 individuals. My second question was, how many individuals continue to be reported to the Fed after falling below the $2,500 threshold in arrears, but not at a zero at that point? To determine this number, they compiled a total number of individuals above the 12,087 to the federal collections debtor files submitted on 1/31/24. The total number of individuals who continued to be reported after falling below the $2,500 is 1,037 individuals. That means that even though your wages are being garnished, you are paying what the court said you're supposed to pay out of your garnished wages. Unless you are at zero, you are being reported. You're paying what you're told to pay. But now you're denied passports. You could be denied a driver's license. This doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that somebody is going to be punished for doing what the court told them to do and that they are trying to do. But it's because they get paid every 2 weeks, once a month, or whatever their payment schedule may be, that they fall behind from time to time during the year. It doesn't mean, and in this particular individual's case, he was behind once. It was at the 6-month mark. So that's why we brought this bill before the legislature, is because people who are having their wages garnished, whether it be voluntarily, and his, by the way, was voluntary. It was not forced by the court. Whether they be voluntary or not, they're being punished for doing what they're supposed to be doing because the reporting system is flawed. If we fix the reporting system, we're going to have people who are going to be able to continue to have their wages garnished, do their jobs, travel for employment from place A to place B, and get the job done. If we allow it to continue the way it is, a person could lose his job and then there's no child support at all. You can't get blood from a stone. So I thank you for allowing me to open this for Representative Spillane and give this information to you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. It seems that the situation with the representative was an unfortunate failure of the system where it just didn't work properly, at least as it was intended to. So this bill would fix that problem. Wouldn't this also perhaps make it more efficient when it comes to reporting the people who are actually delinquent? I feel like if it's automated, it's getting done automatically rather than what's happening now. Someone has to actually make the report themselves.
You're absolutely correct. Again, this bill will affect, over the last 2 years, almost 3,000 people. So you're absolutely correct, because the division of the state that handles this is not able to report correctly. If it was automated and done correctly, it solves a lot of problems.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you very much.
Seeing that the prime sponsor, Representative Spillane, is not here, would you, yes, I said is here, would you like to come forward and testify?
Oh, it matches your shirt.
It doesn't go with my shoes. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This bill came to my attention unusually by me actually encountering the situation, which doesn't usually happen. I usually have a constituent bring something to me, and then I have to see if it's true. In this case, I lived through it, so I know it's true. I had been having my wages garnished for child support for years. And yet when I got a new job and I had to travel into Quebec, I checked my passport and it expired within 4 months. So I knew I had to have it renewed. And I sent in my application with my old passport. And in 8 weeks, I got a denial letter from the federal government saying that I owed back child support. And I thought, how could that be? I've been garnished every time. I've never gotten a notice from the state that I was late. Turns out, because I get paid every 2 weeks, when they pinged, and I had called the federal government to find out. I called the Secretary of State's office down there, the Department of State, and asked them why. And they said, when we get an application, we ping New Hampshire. We ask them, is this person behind? And New Hampshire tells us thumbs up or thumbs down. They don't tell us an amount. They just tell us they're delinquent or they're not. And in my instance, I was delinquent $5 because my pay periods did not line up with what was expected by the system. I think the system was set up when people were paid majority weekly, because every pay for child support is accrued weekly. There's no other option. And I think it was also set up when most people were not garnished automatically by the state. And right now, in most instances, if you don't ask for an alternative, you're automatically garnished. And so we have a problem where anybody who's not paid weekly is going to be in arrears at some point during the year. When I got the information back from the federal government, I went through and I started looking at the pay periods aligned with my pay. And I realized, well, sure enough, it's falling behind. By the middle of the year, it's very behind. By the end of the year, it's completely caught up again, because your company takes the amount that the state says you have to pay and it divides it up by your pay periods, and that's what they garnish and send to the state. But they only send it on their pay periods. So at some periods, the state's expecting a payment and they haven't gotten it yet from your company, who already took it from you, but hasn't sent it to the state. So there's a problem here in the fact that we need to modernize the system to take into account that most people are paid biweekly right now. Most people are not paid weekly. Some people are only paid monthly, and I'm glad I wasn't in that boat, because I would probably never be on time until the very end of the year. It would always be at some point during the month, I would be delinquent 3 weeks worth of payments. So what we need to do is take a look at all these other people that are being impacted by this. I mean, for me, it was a simple fix. I called up the state, I paid $5. I told the Department of State, run my passport again, send it to me. Some people are not in that boat. They don't know that they can contact these people. They don't know what's going on. They just know they're getting denied services. And it's not just passports. It could be any federal service that is dependent on you being not behind in your child support. And I hate to think of all of the thousands of New Hampshire residents who may be denied services because our system's a little outdated. So I really ask you to take a look at this situation and make sure that we line this system up with the way that people are being paid these days. And even, in my opinion, we should probably have an exemption that it doesn't sit in the same bucket if it's being garnished, because if it's being garnished and the person's fully employed and you get the payments regularly, there should be no report to the federal government. You know you're getting those. Let's focus on the people who are paying outside of the garnishment area when they fall behind, because the garnishment of wages is already automatically taken care of as long as the person stays employed. And if they become unemployed, that becomes a flag that triggers in the system anyway. So I appreciate your time today, and I am sorry that I was a little late. I was talking with Senator Lang and got sidetracked. So it does happen. And I'll take any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. That's a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I asked the last representative who testified, and asked the same question. It looks like this would solve the issue that affected you, which it seemed to really just be like kind of a gap in the system. But I'm reading this that it would, because it would be automated reporting, it would also expedite the reporting of individuals who are actually in arrears.
I think that's true. In addition, I can tell you that I never received a notice that I was behind because I was garnished, right? So I had no idea that I could have not gotten my passport approved because I was behind. The state never told me I was behind. I was garnished and I was paying the payments. So I never fell into that threshold where they told me I was behind. So I just willingly submitted my old passport, and now I had none because they had my old one and I had nothing in my hands. And on top of that, I think that notification isn't being made automatically, and the department actually admitted to this, the BCSS, Bureau of Child Support Services, or BCCS, BCSS. Bureau of Child Support Services actually said in the House committee, they don't tell the federal government that you've gone to zero. That should probably happen too. Why should it be on me to tell them I've now hit zero, so go ahead and process it? If they're going to automatically or in some way report that I'm delinquent, then when I'm no longer delinquent, they probably should tell them I'm no longer delinquent too, rather than just leave it up in the air. And those things I think could be fixed by this.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your patience while I was getting here.
Not a problem. I understand how easy it is to get sidelined by Senator Lang. Okay, the chair will call Representative Cyril Orrs.
I'm going to wave off.
You're going to wave off? Okay. The chair will call Attorney Matthew Hayes and Director Lisa Dukowski from the Bureau of Child Support Services.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Attorney Matthew Hayes. I'm with the Bureau of Child Support Services. I serve as a legislative liaison and a staff attorney. And we also have our director. I'll let her introduce herself.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Dekatowski. I am the Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Child Support Services with the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services.
So thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak about HB 1189. The Bureau takes the position that it is already in compliance with its federal requirements. It does have an automated system for child support enforcement. The regulations have long mandated that the child support programs in every state develop an automated computerized system for all its enforcement activities and establishment activities. I have the citation for the CFR in my written testimony I'm going to submit after this, but it's 45 CFR 307, and that provides a pretty exhaustive list of requirements for all the things that the software is required to do, and it's certified by the federal government. And we say the federal government a lot when I come here, but I'm going to be more specific about that agency today because I think it's helpful. A lot of the child support program, the child support program at the federal level is run by the Office of Child Support Services, and they establish a lot of the specific criteria that the state programs are supposed to be using when enforcing the cases. So they are responsible for helping certify what the automated system is supposed to do and to make sure it's doing, every state has the software system doing what it's supposed to be doing, including the kinds of data it needs to be gathering and where that data goes. It essentially their regulations and their policies essentially direct the states what information to provide, what information they need. So I guess the sense, what I'm trying to say is that we are already complying with our enforcement procedures that are required of us by the federal government, and we're already complying with the information that they want from us. So in a sense, I would say, looking at the statute or looking at this bill, if it were to become a statute, it's certainly possible that it could be telling us to do something outside of what we already are supposed to be doing. Now, I can't speak to anybody's specific case. I can't acknowledge whether or not it's being enforced or anything of that nature, but I can speak generally. And I think we're certainly happy to answer any questions the committee has about specific enforcement remedies. I know that some general discussion was made about the passport denial program. We can talk about that. We can talk about any number of enforcement programs that the federal government requires us to be a part of. But with respect to reporting balances, I'd like to also state that once a specific threshold is met for a specific enforcement program. So for example, the passport program, once that threshold of $2,500 is met as an arrearage, that gets reported to the federal government, and that's through that office I mentioned, the Office of Child Support Services. That is an automatic process that goes out through our automatic system. And once that threshold is met, that keeps getting reported. That balance of arrearage keeps getting reported until it's either zero or the state makes some kind of exclusion based on its own policies. And again, this is very fact case by case dependent, and also depends what program we're talking about. That is something that already happens. So I think I'm gonna let the director see if she wants to add anything to what I just stated, and then we're certainly happy to take whatever questions the committee has. And I also have some information about the passport denial program that I'm happy to submit as well.
Thank you. Let's go ahead, Ms.
Dekatowski.
Dekatowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Lisa Dekatowski, Bureau of Child Support Services, Bureau Chief. Again, I think the only thing that I would like to add to Attorney Hayes's testimony here is in response to Senator Abbas, your original question to the representatives previously, the requirement of the child support automated system, the state agency, we do update periodically on a monthly basis the updated balances and amounts. As Attorney Hayes commented, that particularly in the federal passport denial program, although in circumstances where the arrearage balance reaches zero and is reported to the Office of Child Support Services, the individual that is reported automatically comes off of that enforcement program, but not if the balance falls below the $2,500 threshold once they've already been reported. That's prescribed in the guidance that is provided to us from our federal partners. And as Attorney Hayes mentioned, there are allowable circumstances for individuals to contact us directly to all state agencies when those circumstances occur to determine if exclusions should be implemented, to which the state agency can do so through our policies and procedures in conjunction with our federal partners. And other than that, I don't have anything else to add, but as Attorney Hayes had mentioned, we are here to answer any questions that you might have or provide any additional information.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question, and I'll direct this at whoever wishes to respond. So there's delinquency amounts that are below the threshold. In that scenario, is that, and I'm not just talking about passports, is that delinquency amount ever reported when it falls below the federal threshold?
Thank you,
And
Senator.
just clarify, like, essentially, we would be reporting more than you're obligated to do under the federal law.
Thank you, Senator Abbas, for the question. I appreciate that. That is correct. We are only reporting on the initial reported file when the criteria, the eligibility criteria for any of the federal collections and enforcement programs are met.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And are there any circumstances where the state is behind schedule on processing payments that have been received, whether for any reason, whether they're mailed in, or I guess things can perhaps create what appears to be arrears because of delays in the system outside the person whose wages were garnished or however was child support was paid? Do you ever encounter any of those delays?
Thank you again, Senator, for the question. What I will say is that the child support automated system is a highly sophisticated and very comprehensive and complex automated system. There are many, I should say, automated triggers that are in place to ensure accurate reporting and payments are received. We have a separate state disbursement unit that we work with where all of our payments are collected. The payments as they come in are placed in the case as they are received. So the financial aspects of the system are reported and accurate based on when we receive them. There are circumstances wherein our staff are trained to look at anomalies that may occur if there is, I believe the prior representatives had made some questions or concerns relative to frequency of wage garnish payments. The system is built to be able to accommodate for that, and our staff are trained to look for those circumstances. And exclusions can be, certain criteria can be placed on cases if that should be the case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? I have a question, because it's a little difficult to, quite frankly, understand if someone is being subjected to wage garnishment. It's for a particular amount of money that's been ordered by the court for child support. They're having that automatically deducted from their pay. How does someone like that fall behind? Or in the case of the representative who testified, there was a $5 discrepancy, and because of that, he was not able to get his passport. How does that work? Because you call the system sophisticated, but it doesn't seem to be sophisticated enough. How does someone fall behind when it's court ordered and that's what's being taken out of their pay, but the system reports them as having a deficiency?
Thank you for the question. I mean, it's really, just want to be careful. I really can't comment on a case that we're enforcing. I can just say that generally speaking, if somebody is on a wage, it's all electronic, it's all automated. So, it wouldn't get flagged for this program unless the arrearage was at that threshold amount. In terms of a wage garnishment, certainly someone's on a wage garnishment and they're making payments. I mean, the federal government in this program wouldn't look at that as a factor. It's really just once that threshold's met, it stays flagged until it drops to zero. So it's certainly possible that someone is making payments, as you already pointed out, and those payments after they get going with their wage garnishment, maybe there was a gap at one point in the past, and that gap is still there. I mean, let's say like someone's accruing at, I don't know, $500, $100 a week. That's the accruals. There's a wage garnishment for $120 a week. So the wage garnishment is taking care of that $100 a week. It's also maybe grabbing $20 extra to pay off an arrearage that was from the past. So they're paying, they're in compliance, and the state court would find them in compliance. But that analysis doesn't quite translate over to just what the federal government's looking at. And that's where that case-by-case piece comes in. If that's the situation somebody calls in, that's something that a caseworker would look at. And then I think that would definitely be taken into consideration. I don't know why it wouldn't be. But, like I said, case by case.
Okay, I have another question. Are these individuals that go through wage garnishment, are they charged a fee at all for this service? Because I'm trying to figure out how somebody has been ordered by the court. They're not an arrearage. They're paying their wages. They're paying their child support. It's coming out of their pay. How do they get behind? That just does not seem to make any sense unless the system is flawed and it's not updating. The floor is $2,500. How does someone who was $5 in arrearage get kicked out? That is well below that level. How does that happen?
I'm just trying to really be careful. The Bureau really can't comment on, I don't want to get too close to commenting on a specific case because there's other parties involved and, it's certainly, I can only speak in generalities. I mean, I can tell you that if an order is brand new, and they're ordered, unless it's an order that's really high, say there's say their order is $2,500 a month, or something extraordinary like that, perhaps it's possible that the accruals would get high quickly. But for most folks that I've run into, it's usually a much lower order than that. And so if the compliance the whole time, then it would never be reported to the federal government. Again, it's an automated system. It would, as the director pointed out, it's set up to accrue on a weekly basis. When we get the payment from the employer, it gets posted onto the system, and the balance is pretty much up to date. It's not that kind of lag that I've ever seen.
Okay. My final question is, are these individuals that are having their wage garnished, are they ever notified that there's an arrearage, that they are behind? And how are they notified?
I think that perhaps I should defer that specific enforcement question to you, because I know that you would be more well-versed in the notifications that go out. If that's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. There are a variety of opportunities throughout the life of a child support case where an individual who is required to pay child support receives notifications of balances on their cases and what is due and or overdue. There are also, the child support program offers a customer portal where they can go in, customers can go in and access their case information to see when their balances are. For those individuals that are required to pay child support, we do send them monthly bill coupons and information of that nature, that they would have that information on it. In a situation where an individual may be eligible for a federal collections program, such as the passport denial program, or even the federal tax offset program, there is what is called a pre-offset notice that is sent to the obligor when they meet those federal collections eligibility criteria. That pre-offset notice specifically outlines what that individual customer can do if they don't agree with the arrearage, if they feel that the information is inaccurate. There are certainly, there may be times when, the mail goes out, but then payments come in. And I think naturally that happens in some circumstances. So we do provide the information where they can contact the state agency if they ever receive anything that they feel is contrary to their records.
Senator Chandler?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have super simple questions, I think. And I appreciate that you can't comment on any specific cases, but we've heard today that a problem arose, at least in part, due to a biweekly pay schedule. So my question is, do you find that you are running into problems more often when, with regard to biweekly payment schedules?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm not aware that that is a problem for the Bureau.
And if I might follow up? Thank you. So when you hear of situations, I'm wondering how you figure out, oh, we've had this situation, this one, they're all similar. Is there a non-legislative approach you take to rectify those? And would any of that sort of cover what we're attempting to deal with this bill?
Thank you again for the question, Senator. Naturally, the Bureau of Child Support Services, along with any other state agency, is always willing and able to look at our business processes internally and find any administrative way possible to be able to improve that and or provide better information or education out to our customers and the public on how our services operate. That's always something that I, as the Bureau Chief, are looking at. So that information is always taken very importantly to us. Certainly, as I mentioned before, there are training circumstances where we can ensure that our staff are really looking at the frequencies and the amounts of the obligations, and if there are proper exclusions that need to be made on cases to preclude or the submission of federal collections programs for those enforcement programs that we were talking about, those can be manually set in cases, and that's already set in policy and procedure.
Senator Wheatley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for sticking with us on all this. So, what we heard, the reason for this introduction was a specific case, and I understand that you can't speak to that specific case, but what I'm hearing from you is that there are perhaps additional factors at play that resulted in perhaps the issue that, we're talking about here. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Again, I think what the Bureau, what I would say to you is this. In circumstances where a case meets the eligibility criteria for any of the federal enforcement collections programs, an arrearage balance that meets that criteria, each of those collection programs have their own set of thresholds. Our current system is certified and set up to be able to report those arrearages as they meet those thresholds accurately.
Okay, follow up?
Follow up?
Thank you for that. Would you agree that perhaps we shouldn't make such a dramatic change when we're talking about one particular incident here? And would you agree with that? And, is there a commitment from your Bureau to perhaps address any administrative issues that might have happened?
Thank you again, Senator, for the question. So the Bureau is absolutely willing and able to try to address any and all issues that come to our attention wherever our authority can allow us to do so. And secondly, I would just say that making any changes to an automated system for the child support program is costly, it's intensive. It could be problematic with our federal partners. There are a variety of approvals that have to go forward. So we would have to take a real deep look at how that would impact us from both a fiscal and a programmatic operations perspective. So we would want to ensure that any changes that were being made would be conducive to all of the program operations, federal regulations, state requirements, and customers that we serve.
Okay, last follow-up?
Yeah?
So, and thank you for that. What I also heard is that if a situation arose like the one was described to us by the bill sponsor, that I forget what to call it, but there would have been a notice in advance of this. Is that correct?
A pre-offset notice, thank you, Senator. Those are sent out in all cases that meet the federal threshold criteria. Yes.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Senator Abbas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Forget about the threshold issue for a second. If a person's in arrears, which, when I say a nominal amount, I mean like, $50, $100, whatever it is a notice sent out in that scenario, or is the notice only sent out when they meet this delinquency threshold?
Thank you, Senator Abbas, for the question. Absolutely. There are many administrative opportunities that we take out to try to engage compliance with an individual that we're working with that's responsible for paying child support. So we will send out, our staff are trained to reach out to a customer when they see that the case is in arrearages to try to determine why that's happening. In addition to that, we will send out notices to try to encourage compliance. So we could send out a notice of debt. We might send out just a regular correspondence letter. We try to engage through communications. But yes, there are multiple notices at any juncture.
Follow-up?
I heard like you may send out a letter, this could happen, what exactly is supposed to happen? That's what I'm trying to get at. Because I think we can agree, I know you can't talk about the representative situation, but $5 in arrears to get your passport application denied and have to go through all those hoops when, first of all, that person was clearly willing to pay the money. They just didn't seem to be aware of the arrears. So you can take that case out and use as a hypothetical. What's supposed to happen when someone's in arrears And what's elective, what's mandatory, what exactly happens?
Thank you, Senator Abbas. I will do my best to try to explain that to you. In a situation where an individual is in arrears after 60 days of noncompliance, initially, the way it would work is that the worker would identify that case, try to do their best to make contact with the individual to try to get compliance, see what's going on, work with that individual to try to determine what the payment is. We would research employment opportunities if they needed a wage garnishment in place, things of that nature. If that were not available and we could not correspond with that individual, we would send them a notice that they were in debt, giving them, again, an opportunity to contact us to try to come into compliance. We would try to work with them as much as possible. If the case then still had no payment and they were continued to be in arrearages, then we would have the opportunity to initiate any of our administrative enforcement remedy options, such as license revocation, such as credit bureau reporting, and any of the other child support enforcement collections programs that we have under our administration. All of those have a variety of criteria that you have to meet. So every case is looked at on a case-by-case basis. But we have a progressive notification and enforcement process. And each one of those remedies has a due notice process where we would notify the person responsible.
Thank you. And last question.
Sure.
And thank you, Madam Chair. So if I heard you correctly, after 60 days of noncompliance, that's when the notice, the attempts to notify the individual that they're in arrears would happen. But if I understood the testimony earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, if they meet the threshold, that's reported every 30 days. So in that scenario, could it be reported to the federal government before the actual payor is notified that they're in arrears?
Can you repeat that again, just so that I understand your question? Sorry. Yep.
I understood
Thank
your clarification.
No,
So
please.
my understanding is after 60 days of noncompliance, that's when there'll be attempts to notify the payor that they're in delinquent on their child support payments. But my understanding was when it comes to this federal guidelines where they report the federal threshold, that's done on a 30-day basis.
Oh.
So my understanding, if I understood that correctly, there'll be times when the federal government is notified before the individual is notified. Or am I incorrect?
Thank you, Senator Abbas. Actually, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. What I recall saying is that every 30 days, once the threshold has been met, we report the updated amount through the federal debtor file every 30 days after that. But it still has to meet that threshold first before it's reported.
But when
Okay,
you meet the threshold, once they meet that threshold, it's then automatically reported in that 30-day window. Is that correct? I guess is the notice going out or is the reporting to the federal government? What happens first? It arrears.
Depends on which criteria we're meeting first. If it's a state administrative enforcement criteria or it's a federal enforcement criteria, that would be dependent upon which notice goes first.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. If someone is getting their wages garnished, usually there's a process, and it's my understanding they will look to see whether or not the person is in arrearage, and then add that into the process going forward, so they will make that up as well as whatever child support payments that are being made. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, yes, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you. Yes, I said that earlier, and that's built into the uniform support order. The court will generally spell that out, and that will be set up as part of the wage garnishment.
Okay, thank you. The second part of the question is because I'm still trying to understand how someone, and this is a particular category of individuals that are getting their wages garnished. This is ordered usually by the court, they've signed the paper, they're going to do this. The court tells you exactly how much they owe, and that amount is what is taken out of their pay. How does someone get in arrearage at that point in time? And that's where I think there's a glitch somewhere in the system, because they've gone to court, they've signed the papers, they know exactly how much is coming out of their pay. But yet they're following the law, they want to follow, they're doing this because they have to. They don't want to be bothered with writing a check which can get lost in the mail, or someone forgets about it, or whatever. They want to fulfill their obligation. How do they get in arrears? There's got to be an accounting measure somewhere that's faulty. And that's, I think, what we're trying to get to. How does that happen? And I haven't heard an answer. I've heard about all these other different things. And I'd like you to, because I don't know if we're going to actually get an answer. We're not execing this today, but I'd like you folks to go back and get me an answer to that in writing, because it's just, we do wage garnishment for a variety of reasons, and it's always set by the court. And how did someone get $5 in arrear and then not get their passport because they were $5 behind? That just seems outrageous. How did that happen? And I haven't heard a reason why. I've heard all about the system and this and that. And the thresholds, $2,500 on the federal side. This is $5. This is not someone who's $1,000 in arrearage or even $100. This was $5. So if you can come back to us with an answer, I know you cannot speak about particular cases, and I understand that. But there's got to be a problem in the system that allowed this to happen. And the last thing I'd like to know, is there an ability for the state to put in a note or an annotation that even though it shows that someone's in arrearage, that they're actually in compliance? Because I think that goes back to my good friend Senator Whitley's question about people that are paying every 2 weeks, or they're not being paid on a regular schedule. And I think that is another problem within the system. So if you can get back to us with that information, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair will call Betty Gay.
Betty Gay, a former legislator and a resident of Salem. I'm hearing multiple stories. One is that you could be considered $5 in arrearage if you were $2,500 plus $5 in arrearage. And so I'm thinking one of the needs I see is that a report should be able to be generated from the child support software that does a total assessment. So is it saying you're $5 in arrearage, or is it saying you're $2,505? When I first heard this nightmare, it went with other stories I've heard of people who are getting frequently threatened with the loss of their driver's license. And it turns out they weren't, it wasn't an automated program. It was, they were sending in checks. And thinking that they were caught up, but then when they questioned the threatening letters they're getting about losing their license, they were able to get it settled and no, they were not in arrearage, or they were in arrearage like a week. So I'm thinking it would really be worth investigating the software, because obviously problems are happening. And if we're talking about people who are not being garnished, where it's not an automated system, there's human error. You know, people, my friends who have gone through this multiple times, and then you have to miss work and go down and prove that you've really paid, and here's your statements, here's your checks. It does happen frequently, and it's a nightmare because you're losing work and you've got a threat of losing your license hanging over you. That comes in a letter. At least it came in a letter to the people who have spoken to me. And also, I was under the impression that there was actually conversation between, this is what I understood, that there was actually conversation that a person from the federal government actually consulted a person speaking for child support and asked, are they in arrearage? And they never talked about how much it was. It was like, yeah, they are. They never even talked about the quantity. And so even though I'm being told that the 2,500 is the ceiling, that you can be 2,500 in arrearage, that's a lot. So I'm not impressed that the federal government has put that number in, because most people in New Hampshire, if they were suffering from constantly being 2,500 in arrearage, that's a serious loss. So, but if we can't change the federal government, we can't change it. However, I can understand that it's a comedy of errors if it was actually person to person talking. That somebody says, are they in arrearage? And the other one says, well, yeah, and they never said how much. So whatever we do, whatever system that we say needs to be upgraded, we need to address and preferably not leave it at 2,500 if there's any way to affect the law, because that's too much for most families. So,
Thank you very much. Ms. Gay, are there any questions from the committee? No, seeing none? Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 1189? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Open the public hearing on House Bill 1511 and call the prime sponsor, Representative Hobson. Adam, could you do me a favor? Could you please tell those folks outside to be quiet? Because it's really resonating through the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Representative Deb Hobson, and I'm representative for East Kingston and Kingston, District 14 out of Rockingham County. I am here to offer HB 1511 relative to the liability for children with disabilities and certain court-ordered placements or episodes of treatment. This is just a housekeeping measure. I was asked to submit this on behalf of the Department of Education. The bill corrects an inaccuracy in the law that was voted in with HB 2 about how the New Hampshire Department of Education is notified of an episode of treatment. Currently, the law states that the courts would notify the DOE about an episode of treatment. However, courts are not involved in an episode of treatment placement. Notification comes from either DHHS or the local school district, so this just clarifies the language. And that is the extent of my knowledge on this subject, so I have brought with me Melissa White from the DOE for further questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Representative. You are Melissa White from the New Hampshire Department of Education?
Yes, Melissa White, Division Director for Learner Support.
Okay, please continue.
And just connecting with what Representative Hobson said, we're just a house cleaning measure. Currently, the episode of treatment does not go through a court-ordered placement, and so it's just cleaning up the language so that it clarifies the episodes of treatment when they come to the department. We will be notified by the Department of Health and Human Services or the local education agency regarding the student's placement and services. And that just helps us then with our tracking so that we can be sure to provide reimbursements as needed for those placements and services.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So I'm glad to see that this notification is happening. I know there's been a lot of sort of back and forth about this issue for children who are being placed for an episode of treatment by the Department of Health and Human Services. My question is, if we're, the analysis says that that DHHS is financially responsible, but aren't there some cases where part of the placement might be for an educational reason? And so I'm just wondering sort of how that financial responsibility plays out when there is an educational component.
Thank you for the question, Senator Whitley. Yes, so it is correct that the episode of treatment, any educational services that are in the student's IEP would be paid for by the school district up to 3 times the, and I brought my numbers here with me, the cost per pupil. So if the average cost per pupil statewide is determined to be for last year around $20,000, the school district is then liable for any cost up to 3 times that amount. And then once that maximum amount is reached around that $60,000 range, the state then pays the special education aid for any of those services beyond that amount. But these are specific to the costs that are the educational costs that are in the student's IEP. Anything beyond those educational costs are then paid for by DHHS.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Okay, are there any questions, further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you both very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 1511? I don't know. Is there anyone from DHHS that's here to speak to this? No? Okay, we're going to close the public hearing. Bill? Bill? Are you supposed to have him?
I'm sure she wouldn't give some of some sugar free. She knows.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
He's fine with that. He told us.
Oh, he wants her to introduce?
Yep.
Okay. Phyllis, did you want to speak on this bill? Okay. I just wanted to make sure. You forgot to check the box. You all set, Matthew? Okay. We're going to open the public hearing on House Bill 1607 and recognize Representative Paterno, who is going to introduce the bill for Representative Cordelli.
Thank you and good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Katie Peternell, State Representative for Carroll, District 6, towns of Wolfboro and Tuftonboro. I'm presenting House Bill 1607, a bipartisan effort to expand the baby safe haven law that was enacted 20 years ago. This bill was almost dead on arrival to the House floor with the recommendation of interim study 19-1. But with some intense CPR, it came back to life, and you have received it in its amended form. Originally, this bill had 3 objectives. 1, allow for the installation of infant safety devices in facilities that are staffed 24/7. 2, expand the age limit for surrendering an infant from 7 to 61 days. And the third part that was amended out in the House was to include an exclusionary rule that would prevent the infant from being used as bait to prosecute the parents. The infant safety device allows for anonymous surrender without having to enter a building and hand the infant over to a caregiver. It is a pretty simple mechanism that is installed on the exterior of a building. It has a door on the outside and a clear plexiglass covering on the inside, and there is no specific unit that is required by this bill. There is one known manufacturer in the United States. Arizona allows for baby drawers, and there are blueprints available for those. This is not a proprietary vendor bill. 2 towns, Wolfboro and Derry, currently have town safety buildings under construction and are interested in installing a device. The devices are also privately funded, so no state mandate. Raising the age from 7 to 61 days would put New Hampshire out in front of surrounding states. Massachusetts also currently has 7 days. Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, and Rhode Island are at about 30 days. New Mexico is 90 days. We want to raise the age limit because developmentally there's little difference between a 7-day-old and a 2-month-old, and also the time when an infant is most likely to come to its demise at the hands of its parents are between about 6 and 8 weeks when they really start crying. And multiple babies in New Hampshire have died between 7 and 31 days. I have distributed a copy of a proposed amendment and would like to discuss what, with the exclusionary rule, and would like to discuss why that is so important. So imagine that a woman who is a serious criminal, surrounded by drug abuse and violence, gives birth to a baby. This mother does not want or knows she cannot handle the responsibilities of raising this child. She would welcome an opportunity to anonymously wash her hands of the baby and surrender him to someone else. Although it is not pleasant, I need to be clear about the situation I am describing. Some parents who surrender their infants may be heroic, but the woman I am describing is no hero, and I cannot romanticize her. This mother feels no remorse for the serious crimes she has committed, perhaps including crimes of abuse, and she wants to surrender this baby for one reason, because it would be in her own self-interest to be rid of this child. But this woman lives in New Hampshire, and she's heard the news. She knows that a mother just like her, Danielle Dauphiné, surrendered her baby to a New Hampshire hospital in 2021. And she knows that instead of keeping Dauphiné's identity anonymous, that hospital reported to the police, leading directly to her arrest for a separate murder charge and a litany of other crimes. In other words, she knows that New Hampshire's safe haven law has become a law enforcement tool to trap and catch criminal parents like her. Again, the mother we are imagining is a criminal surrounded by crime. She realizes that if she safely surrenders her baby, the hospital will identify her to the police, who will pursue and investigate her. Bringing her baby forward will directly and immediately expose her to the eyes of the state. As a result, she does not come forward to surrender her baby, and instead she keeps the baby out of fear of arrest. And my question is this: what will happen to the baby? We know what will happen. As long as our safe havens are used as a tool of law enforcement to catch criminal parents, then that baby will die, be neglected, or, like Dauphiné's first child, live a short life of unspeakable abuse. Here's a hard but obvious reality. The mere fact that a baby's parents leave him with a stranger or in a box shows that the baby is better off being surrendered than remaining with his parents. No baby is better off if his parents keep him only because they fear being arrested and jailed. It should be just as obvious that if we do not make these improvements to New Hampshire's safe haven law, The law will simply no longer work. Dauphiné herself told police that she used a safe haven because she thought it would allow her to rid herself of her baby without attracting attention from the authorities. But she was wrong. And if we do not change that fact now, the next such mother will not make the same mistake. Instead, she may decide it is more convenient to simply poison, starve, and bury the baby, just as Dauphiné had done to her previous child. Already, those babies most in need of our law are not being brought forward. You all know that in December of 2022, a homeless woman near Manchester gave birth in a tent and then abandoned the unclothed baby in the woods, causing the child to almost die of hypothermia. But we only know of that case because the homeless woman in question is the daughter of a famous athlete. Do you know the name of Madeline Kittner? Madeline was a baby born into a cesspool of meth addiction and other drug abuse in a Somersworth mobile home park in 2022. Madeline lived for 17 days until her mother and other adults who were high on drugs wedged her into the cushions of a couch where she suffocated to death. We only know about Madeline's death because of a lawsuit filed last year. According to New Hampshire's Child Fatality Review Committee, over the last 5-year period, there were 34 infant deaths in New Hampshire where abuse or neglect was not ruled out. These infants need your help and protection right now. There is a critical difference between babies and our other constituents. There's a critical difference between this issue and almost all of the issues we consider here. That difference is this: a helpless baby cannot drive to another state that has better safe haven laws. These babies are at the mercy of their parents, and only we can give those parents every incentive to save them. This bill will do that. Well, this amendment would do that. It would expand the age window in which parents can surrender their child, allow the optional construction of baby boxes to better protect parental anonymity, and most importantly, with the amendment, it will ensure that law enforcement and prosecutors can no longer use our safe havens as a tool to catch criminals. As the New Hampshire Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys has explained, this is no different than other areas where we restrict the tools that law enforcement can use. Our laws exclude evidence obtained from illegal searches, but this does not mean we want criminals to go free. It means that the police must use other tools, not illegal searches, to catch these criminals. In the same way, police must use other tools to catch criminals besides baby safe havens. It really should be that simple. Some object that if we enact these protections, then parents who have physically harmed their child may escape punishment by surrendering the baby alive. But when you consider the question I asked you earlier, you can see that this objection is really, and there's no other way to put this, an objection that the baby is actually alive. The objection is that there will be no murder prosecution because we will have a live baby instead of a corpse. The argument flat out prioritizes punishment over the lives of babies who cannot help themselves. This issue is not an abstraction. It is not a hypothetical. The situations I have described to you have happened before, and next year or next month, they can happen again. The life of the next Madeline is in your hands, and at this moment, and she cannot wait for legislators to organize a study committee on whether she will live or die. What is more important, punishing criminals or saving babies' lives? I know my answer, and so do a large bipartisan group of my co-sponsors. Your most dependent, most vulnerable, and most innocent constituents need you. We need to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves and protect them with the passage of this bill along with the amendment. And so I ask that you not only consider passing House Bill 1607, but also consider including the proposed amendment. So thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Cordelli, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman and honorable senators. Representative, first of all, Glenn Cordelli representing Tufton Borough, Wolfboro, and Ospey in the beautiful Lakes region. You just heard Representative Petronell eloquently lay out the reasons for the need to expand our 20-year-old safe haven statutes. She also presented an amendment that was part of the original bill. And as she indicated, the bill was divided on the House floor without the knowledge of any of the sponsors in a really a move that was unexpected. The majority of the bill was passed on a vote of 372 to 1. The one section with the quote-unquote exclusionary rule, which is the amendment that you have before you, was defeated by 3 votes, largely because of confusion about the process. We are asking that you add this amendment and this language back into the bill, as it adds protection for a parent surrendering a baby from investigation or prosecution due to evidence gathered as the part of the surrendering of the baby. And this language is taken from the current statute for immunity under liability under the Controlled Drug Act. That language dates back to House Bill 27 in 2015, and there is a handout with information from that bill and from the testimony before a Senate committee, coincidentally chaired by Senator Carson. The handout shows that and highlights that there was support for this language from the Department of Safety, DHHS, and the ACLU. That bill was signed into law and is now part of the Controlled Drug Act. And you'll see that in Exhibit 1 in your handout. There is also a handout that shows the actual language in the bill and in current statute as compared to the language in the amendment that we have proposed. And the key phrases from current law, it says, gained as approximate result. In our proposed language, it says obtained as a result of approximate result. So we tried to replicate something that was already in current law in order to make it clear that someone who is surrendering a baby cannot be prosecuted, or any evidence from that surrender could not be admissible in court. As Representative Petronell indicated, we don't want this to be a tool of law enforcement. They have many other tools available to them. It is extremely important that this language be added back in. We do not want additional Danielle Dauphiné cases in New Hampshire. And cases like hers have a chilling effect on other parents who might want to surrender their baby, but might be afraid for being arrested for a prior crime or unlawful act of some kind. You also have in the materials that was just handed out the letter from the Criminal Defense Attorney Association in support of this language and this amendment. The goal here is to save babies when a parent is in crisis due to addiction or abusive partner. We do not want them to not surrender the baby because of fear of prosecution. That baby might be returned to a household where there is abuse, and that could lead to further harm for the baby and possibly death of the baby. This should not be a law enforcement tool. It is a matter of a safe haven or a dumpster. And we ask your support for this bill with the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Are there any questions? Senator Chandley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I apologize. I probably should have asked the previous speaker because she mentioned it, but since you are
I'm here now.
in the hot seat. I know that it says, I know the previous speaker said that this does not talk about a brand or a specific product, but it is called the Safe Haven infant safety device, and there is a product which is
It's
marketed
called
as
a baby box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any, do you see that as problematic in any way?
No. We've checked in terms with lawyers, and there should be no problem. We are using it. That's why we specified not baby box in the bill, but infant safety device. And we do know that, as was indicated by Representative Petronell, that in Arizona they have a totally separate device that's in 6 hospitals there that's called a baby drawer. And I think you'll hear about testimony about other similar devices elsewhere in the world that are made by someone other than this U.S. baby box company.
Follow up? And so, on another note, to what extent have these infant safety devices been used that you're aware of, and have there been any problems that you know of?
Yeah, there's a number of baby boxes around the country. I think Ohio has the most, maybe 10 or 12 baby box locations, if not more. And we do not know of any problems with these devices.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. In respect to the potential amendment, which is that exclusionary rule, and I'm not saying I support one way or the other, but I certainly understand and appreciate in a criminal case why you would want all that information excluded. I suppose in a case where if the parents ever tried to regain custody of the child down the line, why would the exclusionary rule extend to a civil case?
Could you repeat that last portion in a civil case of what nature?
If there was ever an event where the parents ever, or one of the parents ever tried to regain custody of the child, is there a reason why that exclusionary rule would extend to a potential civil case beyond the criminal case?
Yeah, I think in the case of a parent trying to reacquire the baby that they have surrendered, I think that's a totally separate process that's really in statute now. And I don't think that a parent who had abused the baby would be going back to reacquire the baby that they had surrendered. Surrendering a baby is a pretty monumental decision. So I see them as two separate things. But we can get you further information to clarify that if you wish from our legal counsel.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Representative, I just have a quick question. What happens if a young woman decides that they're going to give away the child, that it's too much, they can't handle it? But what happens to the father or any of the grandparents? Do they have any legal standing if they find out that she has abandoned the baby through this procedure? Do you know offhand?
I do not know offhand, but we can check on that for you, certainly.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Right. Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will call Representative Mooney. Good afternoon, Representative.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and senators on the committee. For the record, my name is Representative Maureen Mooney. I represent Hillsborough County District 12, that's the town of Merrimack. I'm here in support of House Bill 1607, also a co-sponsor. I'll make note that I was a co-sponsor to the Safe Haven law in 2003. That law has remained untouched, unchanged for 21 years in New Hampshire. This bill now is a reasonable expansion and update to the existing law. and provides further anonymous, keyword, anonymous access for those in need. However, like the previous two speakers mentioned, I too am in favor of an amendment that reinserts the exclusionary clause that was part of the original House Bill 1607 on the House side. This completes, that clause is critical to completing full anonymity. That clause was taken out on a division vote by only 3 votes in the House. I will add that the other parts of the bill were approved by the House on a division for those sections, as was mentioned, 372 to 1, which is an overwhelming endorsement. It's clear the bill is needed as an effort to protect lives. Currently, 13 other states, 13, have this safe haven expansion. That is this baby box feature. So I ask that you please amend the bill to include the exclusionary clause that was in the original version and recommend then to the full Senate ought to pass with amendment. As we know, the Safe Haven Act has been critical in saving lives. I'm told DHHS doesn't have a full count over 21 years of how many children have been saved through that law. However, headlines have been made when babies have been left in hospitals, and it's quite heartwarming to see. And there's no doubt with this bill, with this exclusionary law, more lives can be saved. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for your attention.
Thank you very much, Representative, for your testimony. Are there any questions? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. And thank you for all your prior work on this topic. So it's very important. But my question was the same as the last representative that testified. I'm just wondering, was there any conversations in the hearings in the House about the exclusionary rule perhaps not applying in a civil case, but only applying in criminal cases?
Well, not based on conversations, as you asked, but I can give you my opinion on that. And that is, if you were to say only criminal or only civil, you're not including full anonymity. Therefore, if you were to say one or the other, you're still leaving it open for the other. And that, again, sort of blows the anonymity out of the window. So my thought is, what comes up criminally, it could be a charge on who knows, but civilly it could be a family court issue. So the exclusionary amendment would have to have both to solidify that full and complete anonymity, which is what will save lives.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
The chair will call Representative Margaret Dry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Representative Margaret Dry. I represent Sullivan District 7, towns of Plainfield, Cornish, Newport, Unity, and Charlestown. I'm here today before you because I'm pretty sure that I'm the only person in this room who's ever responded to an emergency call for a child left on a doorstep. Just before the Safe Haven bill went before the legislature in 2003, our local rescue squad responded to a call for an infant left outside. Here's what I wrote to the committee for that legislative hearing back in 2003. When my husband and I responded to a call recently for an infant left outside for an unknown amount of time, I immediately thought that some other overworked mother had left her sleeping baby in a car and forgotten about him, or something like that. I was totally unprepared for what I found. The 3 adult women sitting in the living room were sitting around a sleeping newborn in a car seat. But this baby had been left on their doorstep about an hour earlier. They didn't have any idea who he was, or who his mother was, or why he'd been left at their home. This happens in Charles Dickens, England, I thought, not in New Hampshire in 2002. The baby was lucky. Although it was winter and cold and rainy, he suffered no ill effects from being left outside. I'd like to focus a little on the rest of us who were involved. The rescue workers who responded but remained outside the house knew only that we were calling for the police. They assumed that meant that we had been too late and that the baby had died, and they were very distressed. The women in the house were hounded by the what ifs. What if we had never heard that baby? What if he had died? Even though the case had a happy outcome. I can only guess what dire circumstances led this mother to abandon her 3-day-old baby on an apparent stranger's doorstep. I do know that many members of our squad expressed concern for the baby's health and his mother's possible future legal entanglements. We also wondered how to prevent this from happening again. I'd worked in emergency medicine for 24 years, and this is the first time I'd seen something like this. How much better would it be to adjust the law so that I might never have to see it again, and so some other desperate mother would not have to abandon her baby to the elements, but could bring him to a safe place without fear of reprisal? Well, it's 20 years later, and I'm still working in emergency medicine, and we are still worried about the same things. The changes in the current law that this bill brings up would bring the law up to date. For example, when we first examined the baby, we had no idea how old he was. I'm a mother of 9, and I couldn't tell. I estimated under 2 weeks, and that's the best I could do. 7 days is too short a time and too difficult to estimate. The time there needs to be expanded. And obviously, an infant safety container to receive the baby is infinitely safer than abandonment on a stranger's doorstep in the winter. And most importantly, the exclusionary rule needs to be reinstated in this bill. I can't say a woman would never leave her baby on a doorstep because I've seen it happen. It's this part of the law that would have given that young woman the opportunity to leave her baby and know that her baby was safe. Let's keep it that way. I'm asking you to support the proposed changes and add the exclusionary rule. Thank you, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair will call Pastor Andrew Hemingway.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak. And I come to speak on support of this bill and specifically of the amendment that you have in front of you. For the last 7 years, my church has participated in a drug and addiction program where we have had even a presence on the main street of Franklin, New Hampshire. As you are aware, Franklin is one of the epicenters of the drug and addiction crisis points in our state. We have, over the last 7 years, encountered many heartbreaking incidences and met with a lot of folks struggling in their addiction journey. And one of the things that I want to speak in reference to this bill is, and specifically the amendment, is that we've come to understand and learn, and I've sat across the table with addicts over the years now, and something that is true about the mindset of an addict is that they are trapped in a world where they are thinking primarily only about themselves. Even a mother's natural desires to protect and provide for their child, as we have seen over and over again, are pushed aside. This extends even to their fear of enforcement by the law enforcement or by the legal community. And so this exclusionary law is, the principle is absolutely critical, this amendment, in really reaching to those who are struggling the most in this addiction battle, because they will be deterred from walking up to a police station or walking up to a fire department or even to a hospital with the fear that something may occur to them. And so I think that this amendment is absolutely critical for the full effect of this bill and the desire to save as many children as we possibly can from dire consequences. We also, as a church, support missionaries in South Africa. And one of our missionaries was a dear friend of mine who lived here in New Hampshire, who him and his family moved to South Africa to start a children's orphanage. And they function there rescuing children in South Africa, which, as you may or may not know, is the world's leading country for orphans, mostly created by the devastation of the AIDS epidemic, but now also the drugs that are being shipped to their shores by China. And there we see the practice and the use of what they call baby havens, probably one of the leading countries for baby havens, and it's used widely. One of the major advantages that they have there is this exclusionary law, where mothers know that they can do that. Now, my friends have found children that they've now adopted abandoned in fields, in plastic bags, in dumpsters. These children today are thriving. If you saw them, you would have no doubt that they received, the greatest care of their life. These are children who will go on to, marry and have children of their own, have successful careers. These are the types of people that we're seeking to save here in our own state. And if South Africa can do it, I believe that here in New Hampshire, we also can do it. I would advocate and plead with you to understand that the mindset of an addict is not one that's thinking in a proper way, and the need for them to have protection before bringing their baby is absolutely critical. I would ask you to support both this bill and this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Pastor. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Diane Paquette. Good afternoon, Ms. Paquette.
Well, I have a little bit of... Are we on now? Can you hear me now?
Yep, you sure are.
So I have a little different perspective, but similar to what everybody's talking about. My name is Diane Paquette. I've lived in New Hampshire for all of my life, over 60 years now. I'm a New Hampshire resident. I am also the daughter of an adopted baby. In 1935, my mom was put up for adoption. And I'm here. And I am the mother of 2 sons. Sorry. So basically, if it wasn't for adoption and other options for babies, I wouldn't be here and my sons wouldn't be here. It is very clear to me today that teens do not communicate like they did in 1935. And this is what they use, unfortunately. And they use it more than face-to-face talking to, their friends, their family. We don't even have to talk about the family unit today. It's not exactly like it was back then. So we have to give these children an opportunity, and I do call them children. We have to give them an opportunity to put their babies in a safe spot. I've passed around to you, I got some good news today and I got some bad news this morning. Another baby was found this weekend on a Tampa, Florida campus, and the baby is dead. That baby was left in a box somewhere on the campus grounds. There are baby boxes in Florida as well, just to let you know. But I did get some good news. My person told me that there are now 223 live boxes. This is the vendor box that we were talking about. I won't mention the vendor name, but there are 223 live boxes, and we've had 44 babies surrendered so far. This is nationwide. Let me go back to my thing. I like the idea of a warm handoff, bringing the baby to the fire station, handing it to the policeman. Everything seems very, warm and comfortable. The problem is these are teenagers who talk on their phones, and this is all their only way of communicating. They don't want to look at somebody in the eye and say, I can't take care of this baby. I can't do this. It's too much for me. They don't want to do that. They're afraid of being recognized. They're afraid of people telling who dropped the baby off, etc. Keeping that in mind, that's why a container like the ones that we have been talking about is helpful for them, because it's a place where they can go. It's the no blame, no name, no shame. That's the quotes that I've heard. As far as prosecuting them for something that happened to the baby, I can tell you that the vendor that I'm in touch with about this has never had a baby dropped off in a box that was abused. The only problem that they seem to have had is occasionally they will get a baby who is drug addicted through birth. I don't know if there's any, and the baby goes to the hospital. It's easy. They go to the hospital, they take care of the problem. So I don't think it's necessary to go after the parents for a drug-addicted baby. That just happened. Let me think what else I want to say. I've been in touch with the Salem police chief, and he gave me permission over the phone today to talk about our email. And he told me, I talked to him about the baby box because Salem is getting a new police station in a few years. And he said, I've had a safe haven sign on the station for 15 years, and nobody has ever brought me a baby. This is a police station that's within walking distance of Salem High School and Woodbury Junior High School, the prime children that would need the services. The reason these kids don't go to the police station with a baby is because they don't want that warm handoff. They need to somehow be secretive, or not secretive, but they need to be anonymous about this. There are no cameras on the boxes, so there's no video that can be used by law enforcement for whatever reasons. It gives them what they need, and it saves the babies. And the most important thing here is saving the babies. I personally don't care about the law enforcement aspect of punishing someone for something they did. If the baby is alive and well, it's a lot better than the baby that was found in the box at Tampa University yesterday. And as you can tell from my handout, there's babies that are left in tents. There's babies that are, there's an 18-year-old woman in New Mexico that was sentenced to 16 years in prison because she put her baby in a dumpster. Fortunately, her baby survived. But there's a lot of problems, and we need these baby boxes. This enhancement to the safe haven law is going to help so many people, and it's going to save a lot of babies. Let me just make sure I got all my points here. The average time that the baby is in a box, and I'm talking about this vendor box, so you can, take it for a grain of salt if you want to, is less than 4 minutes. There's a couple of minutes for the parents to leave after they've brought the baby in. But an alarm goes off the moment the baby hits the bassinet inside of the box. An alarm goes off, a silent alarm inside the building. 2 minutes later, another alarm goes off. This alarm makes phone calls. This alarm calls 211, 911, state police. It can call everybody that you want. There's one fire chief in Indiana who gets a personal phone call on his cell phone when the baby box goes off. He received 3 babies within 6 weeks. The first baby came 9 days after the box was installed. Then another baby came a week later, and then 2 weeks later, another baby. These boxes are needed, no matter what. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to say. Let's see. I think that's about it. I mean, it's pretty obvious, and I would just be repeating what other people have said. But so far, there are 86 teenagers, those are moms and dads, because it takes 2, who are relieved and satisfied that they put their babies in a safe place and somebody else took over. And the other part of this vendor box, and I won't say the exact name, is that there's a bag that falls out of the box. When you open the door, there's a bag that falls out of the box. Inside that bag is material. There's a counselor that's on the phone 24/7. It's a person. There are medical information about the mom and the baby, because there are 2 patients here. And there's all sorts of different information in many different languages to help these parents go over the trauma of leaving their baby and taking care of themselves medically after the baby's born. That's all I have to say. I don't know if you have any questions, but
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Paquette.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions, have a great day.
Okay.
Betty Gang. Afternoon, Representative.
Afternoon. Thank you very much. We've had really excellent testimony explaining every aspect that has to be considered. And this bill does put you up to making a harsh decision. This isn't, this deciding on this bill is not, this is great and this is bad, so it's really easy to choose how to vote. But the harsh reality is, if we are more concerned about prosecuting people who gave birth, who don't love their kids enough to keep them, or no. Anyway, our real concern is, are we so married to the need to prosecute people who abuse babies that we are willing to risk babies who hopefully they would give up rather than abuse? It's, I understand that was the issue that in the House was argued about and why the this amendment was removed. Even though later people, it actually would have passed if the people who voted against it, if 3 people had voted against passing it because they didn't understand. But the point is, it is a real issue. The important thing for me is the survival of the baby. I don't need to prosecute that person who did act criminally. So it's just, I know that is a real hard decision for some people to get over. But I say vote for the baby's life rather than one more prosecution. Another thing that I've heard people express concern about is, why does it have to be private? Why can't they just hand the baby over? And because in Salem, since this law was passed that you would not be prosecuted for giving up a baby, no one has done a warm handoff. Nobody. So obviously it's not working in Salem. But I don't think they're atypical. I really think that people forget that those are powerful emotions when you're dealing with giving up a baby. The guilt can come from many different directions. I can picture a teen feeling guilty because their parents didn't know and wouldn't approve. The guilt is from just getting pregnant, fear of angry parents, or a boyfriend who demanded that they abort the baby. So all kinds of bad feelings surround an unplanned baby who coming into no family ready to take care of them. And like, sadly, it's been testified, you're also dealing with parents who are on drugs who really don't care about the baby. They care more about themselves, and they're going to do whatever protects them from being prosecuted. So I'm just adding my vote. Please support the amendment and the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Gay. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Emily Hodgkins.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you so much for your time today. I am here to share my personal experience with Baby Savers. I am part of Hill Village Bible Church, which Andrew Hemingway is the pastor of. And as he mentioned, we have missionaries there that have a children's home. I had the opportunity to spend January there volunteering and was able to see in person the Baby Saver and the effects that it can have. One of our girls in our 3rd grade class was Jessie, and she was saved by that Baby Saver, and she is thriving in her home. She has a little sister that was also adopted and saved, and just seeing the joy of the child and their testimony. So the Baby Saver, I was very confused at first as to what it was. but it just provides a safe, warm, dry place for a person to leave the child. Once the baby is placed in the saver, a pressure plate is activated and a team of people are alerted through their phones. There's also a camera inside the saver so the teams can see inside the box at all times. Once the outside door is closed, it automatically locks so no one can come behind the person and steal the baby. The team in Africa were all trained in basic infant first aid, and they have strict protocols to follow when receiving the infant. The box is routinely checked and tested to ensure that it is functioning correctly. Also, the box has its own power supply, so the baby can be retrieved even during power outages, which happens quite a bit in Africa. Hearing the testimonies of the babies and infants abandoned and left to die makes this device a beacon of hope in their community. On my return, I looked up the safe haven laws to see what we would need to do to install one in our community or even our church. I was very stunned to find that it wasn't legal in New Hampshire, and even more shocked to realize that the same horrors that I heard of in Africa are happening in our own backyard. I believe without a doubt, having the baby savers and protecting the mother from prosecution will save countless lives. Right now, mothers do not have that security to safely leave the child without fear of arrest or prosecution. This bill could be the difference between life and death, and even the child being placed into sex trafficking. This bill gives a child the chance to grow up and be a thriving member of our community. We want these children to have the chance to live free in our great state. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will call Phyllis Woods.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. 22 years ago, a former representative that may be familiar to some of you, Representative Bob Clegg, entered the Baby Safe Haven law in the House. It passed unanimously. It was killed in the Senate. The next year, Senator Clegg became a senator, and he said, "You enter this bill and pass it in the House, and I'll make sure it passes in the Senate," which is exactly what happened. Now, the impetus for this bill was we had situations where there was a university student who gave birth secretly in a restroom at UNH and left the baby in the garbage can. If we had had a safe haven law, that woman would have been able to call 911 or wrap the baby up and turn it over to any safe haven location. The second thing that happened at the time was there was a woman who had given birth at a cottage in Hampton Beach. She took the baby and left it in the corner of the yard. She was called, she had called the ambulance later because she was hemorrhaging, and the hospital called the police and said, "This woman has recently given birth." So the police went and they found the baby, and it was alive, thankfully. Again, this woman would have been able to anonymously bring that baby with her to the hospital to be safe. The reason this bill was put in was because we wanted to create an exception in the law against prohibiting child abandonment. That was a very simple way to handle it. The whole purpose was that that woman would be able to remain anonymous, would be able to hand that baby over to several locations, in fact, even call 911 to arrange for somebody to come and get the child. The spirit of that law was that that woman would remain anonymous. That was the intent. That was the intent and spirit of the people that sponsored and worked for this bill. That was the intent of the members of the House and Senate that passed it nearly unanimously. There was a need that was recognized in the last year or two that we needed to make sure it was in the law that it would remain, that the woman would be able to remain anonymous. So that was the impetus for this new revision last year that we were working on. It has 3 provisions in the bill. The first one was, of course, to expand from 7 days to 61 days. That's a good upgrade. That's a good enhancement. The second one was that, let me see, the second provision was that it would remain anonymous. That was absolutely critical. That was central. That was the whole purpose of putting in this renewed revision. And the third one was the provision that we could have a baby box installed, which would further provide for anonymity for somebody turning over the baby. It's interesting that when we started working on this bill last year, that I had intended to call Senator Clegg, who's remained a friend all these years. And when I found out about it, I said to Representative Mooney, I'm going to call Bob Clegg to see if he could support these revisions. That's when I learned that he had died. I think that he would be I hope that you will honor, his spirit and intent for this bill, and provide this exclusionary exception, which is absolutely critical. If we don't have this anonymity, we might as well not have the bill, because these are the babies that we're going to work to save. I think all of us at some point believe that we may be called to judgment and justice for the wrongs we have done and the good we have left undone. But we would be really in a bad shape if we didn't have mercy. And I think that today we all would like to see justice done for wrongdoers and perpetrators. And part of the justice, of course, is that we would be able to protect others from further harm. But I'm asking you today to please take a look at the provision to employ mercy. Mercy for the innocent young child, the baby, we believe is far more important than justice for a perpetrator. So I'm asking you to please do the right thing, do the common sense thing, and do the life-affirming and saving thing, and pass this bill with this exclusionary clause.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Woods. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Representative King.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Seth King. I am representative of COAS District 4, which includes the towns of Whitefield, Jefferson, and Carroll. So I serve on the House Health and Human Services and Elderly Affairs Committee, and today I'm speaking to give you the other side of the story. So this bill, with a few minor things that were questioned at the very beginning that were overcome, this bill enjoyed broad bipartisan support in the House, in our committee, except for the exclusionary rule. There were several members, myself included, who were very concerned that this would allow individuals to intentionally abuse children in a way that was intolerable for us. So those of us who oppose the exclusionary rule as written actually do support the exclusionary rule to a certain extent. So we generally agreed that individuals who are drug addicted, incapable of caring for their child, and maybe
had neglected their children, we really did like the idea that they would be able to drop off their child and not face prosecution. However, there is a difference between individuals who are poor parents, are incapable of taking care of their children, and those who are opportunists and who will intentionally abuse physically or sexually children. So what we did is we brought these concerns to the sponsors of the bill, and we tried to work with them. Originally, I made an amendment to the bill which would get rid of the exclusionary clause, and it was later brought to my attention that the problem with that is that if we got rid of the exclusionary clause, the word would get out on the street that individuals are being prosecuted for dropping off their children, including those who maybe just have a drug addiction. And the problem is that if that happens, then the ability of the bill you have in front of you, it gets killed, because nobody's going to want to drop off their baby if they fear prosecution. So I withdrew my amendment of getting rid of the exclusionary rule completely, and legislators from both sides of the aisle tried to work with the sponsors to see if they could make an amendment to the exclusionary rule that would thread the needle, that would allow us to turn a blind eye to those who are just poor parents, not capable of taking care of their children, but would allow us to prosecute those who have intentionally abused either sexually and or physically children. So, for example, children who arrive with broken bones, massive bruising, semen-stained diapers. Use your imagination. And if you think that's unlikely, just a few weeks ago, there was an individual who was pimping out her newborn child to pedophiles. So there is real evil in the world. There are people who will take advantage of a loophole in the system. And my concern is that someday there's going to be a headline in the newspaper that reads, "Sexually and physically mutilated child gets dropped off in baby box, perpetrator walks free," because we have hogtied our ability to prosecute those individuals. So unfortunately, the sponsors of the legislation were unwilling to thread the needle. They wanted it all or nothing. And that was something that was defeated initially in committee. We were going to go, they did not have the votes to get an OTP motion, so we originally went with the interim study. When it went to the floor of the House on the day of interim study, I did not intend to speak on this issue. But what ended up happening was that shortly before the House session, the attitude had changed, and leadership decided to push for the legislation as is. I quickly ran up there once I realized this had a strong chance of passing unamended, and I spoke about my concerns on the bill. I was unaware of what could happen, but there was another individual, another representative, who decided to put up a motion on dividing the bill. It seems to be that there was broad bipartisan support for the crux of the bill that you have in front of you, but the amendment needed further discussion. So we voted on that. We separated the bill into two, and then we eventually voted on the exclusionary rule, and that was defeated by 3 votes. The original bill that you have in front of you, or the bill you have in front of you, only had 1 no vote. And I was not that no vote, by the way. I did vote for the bill. I don't know who voted against it. But my encouragement to the committee would be that you actually do have some sort of an exclusionary rule, but to thread the needle in such a way where the most heinous crimes against humanity can still be prosecuted. And it's not just so that we can prosecute the evildoers. The justice system is not there just to prosecute evildoers. It's also there to prevent evil from being done, because there are opportunists who, once they know that they have a legal loophole, they'll take advantage of the situation. let me ask you this. If an individual were to kidnap a child and that child were gone for 60 days, would the state police ever come out and go on the media and say, if you just bring back the child alive, we don't care what you've done to that child for the last 2 months, we will let you off the hook. There will be no prosecution. Would they ever do that? The answer is no, they would never do that. It's the same reason why we do not negotiate with terrorists. The reason why is that if you ever were to send that clarion call to everybody out there that you have a get out of jail free card, people will take advantage of that situation. Okay, if we tell people that they have 60 days, they can do whatever they want, whatever cruel and unusual, torturous punishment to that child that they want for 60 days. And then as long as they drop it off in a baby box, we will turn a blind eye. There will be people taking advantage of that. And the other problem is that if that does happen, people from all around the country, other states, the baby box idea or the safety device idea is going to be widely ridiculed, and people will automatically think, oh, I know what those baby boxes are. That's to let criminals just totally abuse children and get away with it. So I think this is a very serious issue. It does require a lot of nuance, and I do hope that we get it right. My preference would be some sort of an exclusionary rule where there's discernment with law enforcement to say, hey, you know what? Let's not go prosecuting every single individual here. Matter of fact, it was widely agreed that 95% of the individuals are just drug addicts, but we can still go after those who really deserve to go to prison. And if you're unable to thread the needle, I still would prefer a passage of what you have in front of you without the amendment. But it would be intolerable, I believe, to pass it with the amendment that's been given to you as is. What I would really like to be able to do is go before the full House and tell them that the exclusionary clause has been well crafted in the Senate, that it's something that I would support, and I believe that if I were to do that, it would get strong bipartisan support in the House. But as is, it's not something I believe can pass. So that's the other side of the story. I hope you will consider the exclusionary rule with a fine-tooth comb, because it deserves it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions, Senator Abbas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. You described some really heinous acts. From what you're sounding like, you think they would have immunity, but can you distinguish that from the exclusionary rule? Because one's an evidentiary rule on suppression of evidence. Immunity means they can't be prosecuted.
Right.
My understanding is that proposed amendment, they can still be prosecuted. They would just have to find another way to gather that evidence on their own.
That is correct. So any evidence that is collected with the baby that's been dropped off would not be allowed to be used in the court of law. However, when it comes to sexual abuse or violence, there may not be any other evidence elsewhere to be gathered. All of the evidence might only be on that child right then and there. So law enforcement might be able to say, hey, look, clearly this child's rights have been violated, but unless they videotape the act, we're not going to be able to find any other evidence. So all the evidence is on the child, number one. Number two, the proponents of the bill would argue, if they're being logical, that the law enforcement shouldn't go looking elsewhere for other evidence to bust the parents anyways, because then it would have lost its complete anonymity, and it would then strike fear into the hearts of people who might surrender their baby, that there is still a possibility for prosecution. There is no such thing as complete anonymity. Our detectives are very good at what they do. I assure you, if a baby is dropped off, our detectives, if they really want to find the person who dropped it off, they can and will find it. My goal is that they'll say, you know what, for these simple drug charges, let's just let it go. Let's not invest the time and the resources trying to bust these people. But when it comes to crimes against humanity, yeah, our detectives, I guarantee you, they can find out who done it. There's DNA evidence. They can talk to local business owners to see if they have any cameras available that caught it. But the immunity clause really turns jurisprudence on its head. It's a complete and radical change from how we do law and order in this country.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Senator Chandley?
Thank you. You've expressed some of your concerns, and I understand the bill was originally referred for interim study. That was the recommendation of the committee. Were there any other factors that you are aware of that went into that recommendation, such as, we've gotten some correspondence from adoptees who have concerns about this legislation?
The only other, thank you for the question. The only other minor concerns were about things like calling it the baby box, which is, a patented name for the makers. And I believe that was changed, that was amended so that it was just a standard name. There was a little bit of concern with the warm handoff initially, but overall, I don't believe that's the reason why anybody voted for interim study initially. It really was because of the exclusionary clause. And when it came to the House floor, both leadership of both houses voted, they signified, please vote yes on the bill. But it was not the same story when it came to the exclusionary clause. They really let members vote their conscience. And that's when it was very close. But, there were a lot of people who agreed this is not right. The exclusionary clause as written it's not something we can support.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Representative, are you aware, and this is a would you know kind of question, that the growing group of people that are being subjected to sexual abuse here in the state of New Hampshire is from infants to 2?
I would believe that, yes. They're indefensible. They have no self-defense mechanism, and they're completely vulnerable, and I agree that we need to do everything in our power to protect them. And I think it needs to be well understood that if you sexually or physically abuse children, you need to be held accountable, and we need to prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. We cannot tolerate people intentionally abusing children, ever.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of people who are signing up late here. We're going to hear from Shannon McGinley. And please keep in mind, Ms. McGinley, we've had a lot of testimony on this issue. So if there's something new you can add, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm Shannon McGinley from Cornerstone Action here in New Hampshire. I do have written testimony that I will be submitting, and in that written testimony, I give innumerable examples from the media about the 3 different kinds of children that could potentially be saved from this particular legislation. So I will point you to that. I also am going to be giving you the letter from the New Hampshire Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, who support the exclusionary rule. I'm going to give that to you as well, but I want to speak to some of the questions that have come up today. So they are different, Ms. Chairwoman. So first of all, it is not an immunity cause. It is an exclusionary rule, to your point, Senator Abbas. A pedophile and an abuser is going to abuse no matter whether or not there's an exclusionary rule in the law. I do not think that before someone is abusing a child that they're going to pause and think, oh, I can hand them off at the 61-day mark. I really don't think that that's going through their head at the time. one of the individuals who was opposed to the exclusionary rule talked about the fact that they believe that there should be an exclusion for someone who is a drug abuser. Well, what if that drug abuser also abuses their child? How are they going to split the hairs on that one? And then it was Chairwoman Carson, you asked about whether there was standing for the father and the grandparents, or perhaps the other parent that was relinquishing the child. And they do have standing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they win. So it's no different than any other abandonment case. They would be able to appeal to get custody of the child in the same way. And I just want to say that every criticism that you are going to read or hear about this bill implicitly assumes that if these babies will not be safely surrendered, they will be safely raised in a stable home. This is a false choice with no relationship in reality. No baby who is left by his parents with a stranger in a box would have been better off with his parents and had kept him solely out of the fear of police, if they had kept them solely out of the fear of police. We have to think about what is going to happen to this baby. If that baby is being sexually abused, for example, that is horrific, and we want that baby out of the custody of those children. The best thing that we can do is to give that baby an opportunity to be relinquished in such a way that the parents do not fear prosecution of using evidence retrieved at the moment, from the moment of the relinquishment. So I'm happy to take any other questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will call Elizabeth Sargent. Okay.
Thank you, Senator. Hi, good afternoon, Senator Carson, members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Sargent. I work for Champaign Capital Group, here today representing the New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police. We are in opposition to the exclusionary amendment as being introduced today. We signed in opposed to the bill in the House only because of the amendment. We certainly do not oppose the enabling legislation of departments or municipalities to put these into place. Absolutely not. And we just want to note that this section was divided in the House. The House position is ITL on this section. And if we can just have the opportunity, we didn't know the amendment was going to be reintroduced for the chiefs to submit written testimony to the committee. We'll do that. And so that will explain more clearly. And Major Bright can explain the technical piece, but just that not to take away another tool for law enforcement.
Okay.
Thank you very much for hearing my testimony. And as Beth said, just in an effort to conserve time here, my name is Bill Bright with the State Police. I'm a major. I oversee the Investigative Services Bureau. The State Police also not opposed to the bill as it was presented, opposed to the amendment. I signed in opposed based on the exclusionary clause amendment. So as far as, some of the things that were brought up, Representative King brought up many of our concerns as far as the abuse that would, a baby that was delivered with abuse, signs of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, those would be the concerns that we have in not being able to continue or to start an investigation. If that is the only time that a crime has been presented, if that's when a crime was discovered, then everything beyond that point would be as a result of that baby being dropped off. And that would be the issue, is that our investigation would begin at that point if that was the only time that the crime was discovered. And that would be a problem for law enforcement to continue that investigation. And I think for the safety of children in the future, if an abuser did this again down the road, that would be another concern.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to put a finer point on it, the concern in part is, you need to be able to determine whether any other children or any other, individuals are at risk. Is that what you're saying?
I think there are many factors that would have to be considered in many, each case is going to be different. If a baby is dropped off healthy just simply because a parent is not able to care for the baby, that's one thing. It's when there's signs of intentional abuse and sexual, physical abuse, and what else may be going on goes along with that. So yes.
Follow up?
Follow up?
You may have heard the chairwoman mention a really startling statistic, and that is that during the pandemic, there has been during the pandemic and since, there's been a dramatic increase of child sex abuse on children 0 to 5. Is that something you remain concerned with? And, with this this exclusionary language in the amendment, would that hamper your ability to deal with that incredibly troubling statistic?
Absolutely. As was mentioned, I mean, truly defenseless victims in that instance. So, yes.
Are there any further questions? Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my. And I guess it's the moral conflict we'll have to work out here in the legislature is, are we balancing the interest of prosecuting the crime as opposed to the interest of the child who's clearly in harm's way? And I think from a priority perspective, is there any thought, though, that by prosecuting these cases, that less parents be willing to surrender the children? Because I think the goal should be to get someone out of harm's way to let the rest of it work itself out. It doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to the abuser. I guess my question is, how do we balance that?
I don't have an answer to how we balance that specifically, but my concern would be is that the patterns of abuse, if they continue, it's not going to end with the one child that's dropped off. It's going to continue. And that's why we have the laws in place that we have, is to prevent those things from happening again. I mean, I can't prevent a crime from happening in the beginning if I don't see it, if I'm not aware that it's happening. But once it happens, it's our job to hold people accountable so that everybody can learn from those mistakes and they don't continue. And that's the point of having these laws in place.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? I think when we're talking about the exclusionary rule, that we do not want to criminalize the act of dropping the child off.
Right.
I think that that's paramount because we don't want babies abandoned in dumpsters or in bathrooms or hidden away someplace to die. We want them to get medical attention. We want them to grow in a loving home. But I think what I'm struggling with is exactly what you're discussing. If the child is abandoned and there are signs of abuse, and in a way you've got to try to weigh this. Is it worth looking the other way because now that child is out of an abusive situation? But what do you do if it happens again to another child? How many times do you look away? A child, it's against the law. And do we turn a blind eye just so we can get that child out of a bad situation? And that's my concern. I don't know how do we do that? I do think there's consensus. We don't want people, either men or women, mothers or fathers, that find themselves in a difficult situation where they just can't take care of the child. We want them to safely be able to give the baby to a safe place without worrying about being prosecuted. It's afterwards when you examine the child and you find that there's evidence of physical abuse or sexual abuse. Do we turn a blind eye to that? And I think that's going to be where the difficulty lies. So.
Agreed.
Okay. So are there any further questions? We'll be more than happy to work with anybody who wants to work on this. To see what we can come up with.
Yep.
Okay, and Ms. Sargent, would be interesting if you can look at the safe haven laws in other states and how they deal with these types of issues. I think that, and I know that some of the other folks are here. Mr. Williams, you might have access to information from DHHS that you can get us, as well as the advocates that have testified here today. So we can take a look and see what other states are doing and how they overcame this particular issue. So thank you. Thank you both very much. Okay, are there any other Mr. Williams, you want to come forward?
Senator Carson's members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I will try to be brief in my commentary. I wasn't planning to testify here today because the bills that came over from the House, the department was fine with the legislation. We acknowledge the good works of the sponsor on the bill. And certainly the House did articulate by dividing the question, removing the one section that the department did have significant issues with. I actually personally testified in the House along with the general counsel from our Division for Children, Youth, and Family within the department. Her name is Susan Larrabee. We did consult with our liaison over at the Department of Justice to getting an understanding of the implications of the language regarding what is being commented as an exclusionary rule versus one of immunity. And so if you actually did a side-by-side looking at the bill as introduced and the amendment, the 1202 that was presented to committee, and that's the only reason I needed to come up here to provide some commentary, the response was that it actually exceeded the scope of what we typically think of an exclusionary rule. Again, I'm here in my capacity as legislative director. I am an attorney by background, but I'm here just to relay the information that we relayed to the House committee. And the concern was that this did encroach upon the area of immunity. And if you actually look at the bill as introduced and looking at this amendment and read clearly the language which it's being stated, it's talking about the wrongdoings. And I'm just going to pull it up very quickly because hearing it is understanding more appropriately the scope of what it's actually saying. After the introductory clause, notwithstanding language, it provides evidence of a crime or wrongdoing obtained as a direct result of a parent acting in accordance with this chapter shall not be grounds, again, shall not be grounds for charges of abuse or neglect or criminal prosecution. In the same way that the Department of Safety just came to testify of their concerns, we relayed those similar concerns to the policy committee, the health policy committee that heard this in the House. And it was at least a position in consultation with the Department of Justice that this would preclude prosecution of a baby that were to be delivered to one of these safe havens in serious physical harm condition or even worse. And so I believe that certainly the House heard our concerns and eventually ended up at a committee level recommending this for interim study. And then when the bill was decided to move forward with the sections that we have no problem with, which are sections 1 through 4 of the bill as originally introduced, that took care of the department's concerns. However, we have, as an agency, significant concerns with the language. And if you compare the bill as introduced with the language here, you're going to see markedly they're no different in terms of its implications and negative implications. The one thing that I haven't heard anybody comment on is the existing law. And building on the work that was done by Senator Clegg, a tremendous amount of work went into this in 2003 when we implemented the Safe Havens Bill. And there's a provision in the law in there to provide confidentiality for individuals who are dropping off their babies, as well as liability. And I'm just going to read into the record what those provisions are so you can see what's already in existing law. So in section RSA 132A2, under section 1, there's a sentence that provides the child's parent or parents shall not be required to reveal personally identifiable information. So there already is a provision in law for the anonymity. If there's things that want to strengthen that, I don't think the department has problems, but if it goes to anything that would limit either evidence or provide immunity for harming a child, it would not be good. We would suggest that would not be good public policy. The second part, they have a whole section that deals with liability. And that was with the understanding that by dropping off a child, that would not be inherently neglect, and that you could not be either at a civil or at a criminal level prosecuted just for the mere fact that you were doing the right thing by dropping off this child. And it provides under section RSA 132A:4, no person or entity subject to the provisions of this chapter shall be liable for any claim at law or in equity as a result of actions taken pursuant to requirements of the section or this chapter. We feel that this provision already, already addresses the issue of the concerns regarding anything in terms of being found in abuse, neglect, or criminally prosecuted for the mere act of having that child provided. So you have to ask yourself the question: what is trying to be attempted by this additional language? And balancing the interest of
protecting children, I think at the end of the day is where at least the department came in that conversation. So thank you for your time. I apologize. I didn't sign up to speak, but because I was not aware that this was going to come up again before this committee, it sounded like the House made a very good decision when they decided to extract this problematic language out of the bill. But I am available to answer questions if you'd like. And I also would like to offer, if you wanted to have further legal review, either by the Senate Legal Counsel or consultation with the Department of Justice, that could be particularly helpful in defining exactly, because you're hearing conflicting information from really smart people in this room, attorney types and all, as to what the implications are. And I think a solid understanding of what this will do would be helpful in your decision-making, whether or not to even entertain this amendment to the bill.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Senator Abbas has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for taking my question. So this proposed amendment, do you read that language that it would provide immunity to the potential wrongful actor?
Senator Evans, could I have you just repeat the last few words?
Yes. Do you believe that the proposed amendment, that provision, it's been called an exclusionary provision, but do you think that you're interpreting it to be to allow immunity from prosecution?
What I'm saying with very limited opportunity here is that a review of the bill is introduced, which I did get some level of position. It was consultation with the Department of Justice relayed to us that they saw this as encroaching upon immunity and not just an exclusionary rule, that I doing a side by side, they look very similar to me. And that's why I'm also suggesting a further review by the Department of Justice to getting really solid interpretation as to the impact of this amendment.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did this confusion on what the rule would apply to come up in the House when this was originally in the bill? Because it seems to be just reincorporating the original language back in. So wouldn't this come up?
It is, Madam Chair, if I can state, the bill is introduced. If you do a side-by-side comparison, there are many words that are similar. It's like word salad, for want of a better word, but it's not exactly the same as the bill is introduced. I think there was an attempt to be made to limiting its application, but I just don't see how it limits it. I think that was the understanding of what was attempted by the amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on House Bill 1607? You've already spoken, Ms. Paquette. Well, we're not going to exec this today, so if you would like to send us an email, address it to Mr. Shalzi, and we will get, every one of us will get a copy of your email. Are there any other members of the public to speak on House Bill 1607? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing.
Yeah, I was busy in commerce.
Yeah, I know. I heard you were busy in commerce.
long hearing we've just gone through. I'm not going to walk you through this bill. Several of you already know the subject. It's been before you previously. But I do want to say, in my opinion, that we have a deficiency in the existing statute, that this bill will do some very good work to address. So for the record, my name is Peter Schmidt. I represent Dover Ward 1, which is Stratford 14, for my 22nd year in the House. I will just say we have several very patient but also very expert and experienced individuals who are going to address this bill and answer questions about specifics, but I want to let them get at it right away. So I'll take no questions, and thank you very much for considering this bill seriously. Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Bob Lynn. I'm a representative from Rockingham, 17 in Wyndham. And I was here for your earlier hearing, which seemed to me raise really, really difficult questions. I think that this is much different than that. It does not raise really, really difficult questions. At least I hope you will come to that same conclusion. It seems to me that what this bill does is as Representative Schmidt pointed out, it is kind of correct what I think is a deficiency in the current law. And as you read the law, I think you basically say that, look, under the existing law, the intent is to say that if somebody is going to be appointed a guardianship of the person or the property or both, the guardianship should be as limited as possible. It should displace the ward's rights in as little of a fashion as possible. In other words, the ward should retain as many of the rights as the ward is able to exercise in a proper way. And I think one of the things that this says is that one of those rights that should not be taken away is the right to have access to your personal records, including your medical records, including the records that say why you have had any kind of guardianship appointed for you at all, unless the court says that there's a reason for doing that also. And you could certainly see that there might be cases in which a court would say that you shouldn't have access to those either. But that unless the court says that, you should be able to have access to those records. And so that's kind of what's covered in section 1 of the bill. And then in section 4, the new paragraph that is added in subsection, that the new paragraph that's added to RSA 464A 40 Roman numeral 2, the new paragraph is section C. That basically sort of says the same thing, that if there's a request to terminate a guardianship, the ward should be able to have access to records dealing with the reasons why the guardianship was imposed in the first place. Again, unless the court says that there's some specific reason why that shouldn't be allowed. And again, I think it seems to me that is completely consistent with the overall idea of the statute, that yes, there are certain cases where unfortunately guardianships need to be imposed, but they really ought to be imposed in the most narrow way possible. And this, I think, just corrects an area where the current law can be read to say there's something more than that. So that's, for that reason, I support the bill, and I hope you'll conclude the same way.
Thank you very much, Representative. Senator Whitley has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I think, when we're talking about guardianship, we're talking about, civil rights, right? We're sort of balancing an individual's civil rights with, and then their capacity, of course. So these are important interests that we're balancing. And the way that I see, I appreciate what you said about, we need to be clear about when an individual has a guardian, what rights do they retain, what rights do they not retain. So I see this bill as sort of just a clarification of that, or just a requirement that it's very clear in the guardianship order. Do you see it that way?
Right, no, exactly. I think that's exactly right to say. I mean, if this were to become law, it seems to me that a court would say, or should say, I'm imposing a guardianship here, but you, for these kind of things, but you still have the right to marry, for example, or you still have certain other rights, and you have the right to look at your own medical records or psychological records, unless the court says, no, in this particular case, there's a reason that you shouldn't be able to see those things. And as I say, I'm sure there could be cases where that would be true, but the court should have to make a specific decision on those kind of things.
Okay, follow up. Thank you. I hear what you're saying. And to put a finer point on it, you're saying that if this bill passed, it would provide sort of greater clarification for all involved, medical providers, all parties involved in this individual's life, that this would just provide that greater clarification one way or the other about the access.
I think that's right. I think that's right, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, are there any further questions? Representative, I don't think you were here when Representative Ned Gordon, who was the judge for the family court, put in a bill that dealt with modified guardianships, that gave the individual who was going to be getting a guardian much more control over what the guardian was going to do. And do you think something like this could be included in that initial guardianship?
Sure. I thought, yes, I think that's probably another way to do it. I sort of thought that at least the language that was added to Section 1 by this proposed amendment, I sort of thought, I realize it's in the traditional sort of guardianship statute, but I thought it sort of did that. But if there's another law, so to speak, that sort of does the same thing, I don't think it matters very much where it is, as long as the law was clear that the ward should not be precluded from having access to their own medical records unless there's a specific reason for doing that.
Yeah, just to clarify, this was passed, it was actually in an omnibus bill, so it was one we came back from. Yeah, it was called supported guardianship. And it really gave the person who needed a guardian a lot more say over what the guardianship was going to look like. And that's why when I read this, I thought, wow, this is something that can already be done. They can say, I want control over my records and papers and everything else when they go in front of the judge to get that supported guardianship. But, it's maybe just a different way to do it. I just thought that would be an opportune time for somebody who is getting some sort of supported guardianship to say, I want this, rather than have to have a whole nother law. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, the only other thing I would say, and I have to say, I do not in any way profess to be an expert in this area. There are other people, including Ms. Rosenberg, who I think are. The only thing I would say, the other thing that I would say that might be a reason for this is, perhaps this would apply to people who have sort of regular guardianships that arguably would not be covered by that other law. And, I have to say, honestly, when you talk about supportive, I'm thinking, am I having a senior moment here? Because I do remember I do remember hearing about the supportive guardianship. I just don't frankly remember if it was in our committee at one point. And again, I'm sure other witnesses will correct me on that.
Thank you. Senator Whitley.
Yeah, thank you. So now I'm remembering correctly what Senator Carson is referring to. The change that we made was to create something. So we have guardianship, that's one thing, but we created an alternative to guardianship, which is supportive decision making. But am I correct that this bill is just related to a guardianship, if someone has a guardianship? Is that correct?
Right, exactly. So in other words, it may be that the reason you would need this, even with that other law, is that if somebody is, for example, already subject to guardianship, or if somebody petitions to have somebody placed in a guardian, a traditional sort of guardianship as opposed to the supported decision making,
Right.
then they still, I would think, ought to have the rights that this amendment would give them.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The chair will call Karen Rosenberg. Sure. That's fine. Just make sure you identify yourselves before you speak.
I'm Karen Rosenberg. I'm the Policy Director of the Disability Rights Center, and I'm here in support of HB 1245.
Thank you. My name is Carrie Tasker. I'm a local probate and elder law attorney in private practice, and I'm just here merely to speak about my experiences. I've been doing this type of work for almost 20 years. So,
thank you.
So this is Karen Rosenberg again for the record. So generally, Senator Whitley, what you pointed out as far as a clarification is pretty much what this bill does. For people who have been adjudicated incapacitated, it's consistent with our current guardianship law in that it requires courts to make specific findings about which particular rights are going to be removed because the person is incapable of exercising them or because it would be harmful. And so currently, and I think what we can do is show you the petition so you can see what it looks like and what orders look like. Thank you. Currently, when someone files a petition to have someone adjudicated incapacitated, the way the petitioner files a form that, and this term is in Black's Law Dictionary, it mushes together two concepts. It mushes together the concept of whether someone is so incapacitated that they should have removed from them the right to control who has access to their records. And it mushes that concept together with whether, even though the person is determined incapacitated and cannot make certain decisions for themselves, it kind of melds this concept of whether they are also in a position where they should not have access to their own records. And you can see that in I hope I didn't give you every single copy I have. I don't think so. I think it's on page 3 of the petition. You'll see I highlighted the section that, where you can see it is page 3, where basically, the petition addresses just whether the person can grant release of or withhold or deny release of their own records, but it doesn't actually look at or specify whether they can retain the right to see their own records. And then what happens is the court issues an order, and I think you've got a sample order in front of you also. And Carrie, please, this is Carrie telling you which page to go
sure.
to.
Yes, Carrie Tasker speaking. So on the order, I believe it's right on the first page, highlighted again as well. It is essentially the same exact language that is in the petition, and what we're finding, at least as practitioners, is that wards are seeking to access their own records. And when they do look to access their own records, it is the assumption within the community, whether it's with banks or with medical providers or whatever, that the ward just does not have the right to access their own records. And I believe this has come from several years of the language being in the orders where it's a little bit ambiguous in that, as Karen was saying, that there are two issues being blurred together. One, does the board have the right to grant release of or access his or her own records? And two, does the board have the right to say their guardian should not have access to their own records? And I think we can all agree that a guardian should have access to a ward's records. They're responsible for making certain decisions. They should have access. But the ward, it shouldn't be blurred into this one statement that says, that the individual should not have access to their own records. And so we see this come up often where a person does have certain abilities to manage some of their affairs and at least monitor some of their affairs, be denied access to their own records. And this solely affects guardianships where somebody is found to be incapacitated to handle certain aspects of their life. This doesn't have anything to do with or affect the supported decision-making piece of legislation that went through a couple of years back, I believe it was, where a person is not under a guardianship. It's a completely different section of the law. So just to clarify that, this is about wards that are in midst of a guardianship. Either they have a guardianship that exists right now, they're looking to either amend it, terminate it, or just merely have access to their own records, or perhaps someone is petitioning to have guardianship over that person and making sure that we establish which rights this person is incapable of exercising. And we want to make sure that we include clearly that they do or they do not have the right or ability to access their own records. And there are going to be certain circumstances, I believe, just from practice, where there are individuals where it would be harmful perhaps for them to access their own records, maybe certain medical issues or traumas in their life. It might be difficult for them to access the records, but I think that that's a situation where the court needs to make that decision and adjudicate one way or the other.
And just like for some practical considerations, this actually has a lot to do with how someone under guardianship just sort of interacts with the community. And here's how it can come up. When someone is appointed a guardian, the guardian will rightfully be controlled. It could be over their estate. The guardian is rightfully making decisions about how their money should be managed and how things are, spent, and decisions and contracting and all this stuff. But the person might have a personal bank account. And when the guardian goes and shows the order of guardianship to the bank, and then, the bank will assume, okay, well, guardianship, person gets nothing because it's not clear right now. And then maybe someone has a personal needs account and they're depositing money into it. They go into the bank, they're under guardianship. All they want is to deposit some money and see what their bank balance is. Well, without something clear from the court, the bank is likely to deny them just that simple piece of paper so that they can see how much money is in my bank account, how much can I spend on presents for someone or whatever they want to spend it on. Similarly for children, who are adults, turn 18, they are getting education as a result of their disabilities. It's really important that we keep students engaged in their individualized education programs, and that during transition period, especially when a child reaches the age of 14 and 16, they are expected to go to their IEP team meetings. And so if the person now is 18 and they're under guardianship, and the school just assumes, oh, well, they don't get to see anything, well, then that student is going to be at a disadvantage in terms of participating in their IEP team meeting, because it would probably be helpful for them to see their progress reports or to be able to look at their old transition plan and see if they want to change anything. Because even though they're under guardianship and don't have the legal authority to sign the paperwork, make the final decision, the IEP team is going to listen to them, and their guardians are going to listen to them. And so that their voice can be heard, because ultimately they're the ones who are going to be receiving their education program. So those are just a couple of examples of how this comes up in the community.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thanks for your consideration. Thank you.
The chair will call Cheryl, is it Steinberg? Please come forward.
Hello, my name is Cheryl Steinberg. I'm the director of the Justice and Aging Project for New Hampshire Legal Assistance, and I'm here today to testify in support of HB 1245. In my role as director of the Justice and Aging Project, I serve people 60 years of age and older. Some of them have diminished capacity or are under guardianships. And I would say in the 30 years I've been serving older people, I certainly know that even if you're under a guardianship, people have differing levels of capacity. It's not like it's a monolith and all people under a guardianship have no ability to understand documents or understand certain financial things. It depends. And that's why, again, you've already heard the guardianship statute is designed to be individualized to try to make those determinations of what people really can and can't do and try to maximize the amount they can do, even if they're under a guardianship. So I do think that this bill accomplishes that, and I do believe it's important, again, in light of the whole idea of our guardianship statute, to allow people to try to be as self-sufficient as possible, to allow them to review their own records if they want to. Again, unless in those instances where it could be harmful. And I guess from my perspective, I mean, unfortunately, what I see, I always say this, I see the bad stuff, right? So I deal a lot with financial exploitation. I mean, I do think overall in New Hampshire, we don't seem to have, thankfully, any of the really bad abuses we've heard about guardianships in other states, which are really bad. But, that being said, bad things can still happen, unfortunately, And so I think, for example, so with if a ward is fearful that maybe my guardian isn't spending my money properly or something, I think it's very important for them to be able to go to the bank and say, I want to see my bank statements, because, if you're just relying on the guardian to tell the court everything is great, I mean, that's not going to be a very good protective measure. So I think it's just in that instance, in my experience, I could see that being a very worthwhile and really necessary thing for them. So for, and I guess overall what I would say is I think allowing access to the records should really, or not allowing access to the records should be the exception and not the rule. So that I think the preference should be to allow the records.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
Okay.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to House Bill 1245? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. One more to go. You don't have to stay. Who was that out in the hallway? I recognized. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for the work that you all do. I know it's been a very long afternoon for you, so please bear with me. For the record, my name is Chris Munns, and I am one of the 4 representatives representing the town of Hampton and Rockingham District 29. I'm here to introduce HB 1197. The title of this bill is an act relative to criminal background checks. Let me start by assuring you that this is not about background checks for the purchases of firearms. It's about taking some small steps forward to hopefully expedite the process employers who are required by state law to obtain background checks must follow before they are able to hire certain employees. More specifically, it addresses those situations where a federal FBI record check is required. If you're like me, any bill that is 11 pages long can be a little, shall we say, overwhelming. What I hope I can do in the time you're granting me this afternoon is try to dispel any concerns you might have. I worked with the Department of Safety to craft this bill, and they are here to speak in support of it. I also reached out to all the affected state agencies to ensure that they were aware of it. None expressed any serious reservations. One agency, the Department of Health and Human Services, offered some suggestions that made the bill better and were incorporated into the version of the bill that the House passed. Let me break down the bill for you. It essentially has three parts. Part 1, included in Section 1 of the bill, which extends from page 1 through the first 3 lines on page 3, provides information on the laws and the processes currently in place and the challenges they create as it relates to FBI record checks. Part 2, which is the lion's share of the bill, consisting of sections 2 through 23, starting on page 3, line 4, and continuing through page 10, line 8 of the bill, identifies specific changes in statutes recommended by the Department of Safety to permit additional state agencies to assist them in the process of collecting fingerprints. Part 3, which is included in section 24 of the bill, establishes a multi-agency task force to conduct a review of all employment and volunteer positions referenced in statute where an FBI record check is currently required. It also recommends where such record checks will continue to be required, identify any new positions where an FBI record check is currently not required, but where it should be, and identify other additional steps and recommendations that should be taken to ensure that employment-related FBI record checks are processed as expeditiously as possible. There are many positions where New Hampshire law requires employees and/or volunteers must pass an FBI record check. These record checks are required by New Hampshire statute to protect the public. However, New Hampshire is facing a workforce crisis, and it has become increasingly difficult to fill in a timely manner many of the positions where these FBI record checks are required. Candidates for a position are accepting other positions before the FBI record checks can be completed, and the turnaround time on requests for volunteers often results in activities or events being understaffed or delayed. All record check requests of this type must be submitted to the FBI, and the FBI requires that all requests submitted to it must be processed and transmitted by authorized law enforcement agencies. All requests submitted to the FBI must include a release form signed by the applicant that includes demographic data about them and a complete set of fingerprints. Under current state law, fingerprints must be taken by a qualified law enforcement agency, for example, your local police department or an authorized employee of the Department of Safety. That creates an inevitable logjam. The only exceptions are under RSA 189-13-1, which provides that an authorized employee of a school administrative unit, school district, chartered public school, or public academy may also take a complete set of fingerprints, and RSA 361-A:2, which gives that same authority to an authorized employee of the banking department. What Part 2, Sections 2 through 23 of this bill does is extend that the authority to take a complete set of fingerprints to other state agencies and departments with oversight for other employees and volunteers where an FBI record check is required. These are quick fixes that will significantly increase the number of individuals and locations authorized to collect this complete set of fingerprints and address at least one logjam, contributing to the time it takes to obtain an FBI record check. To give them all the time to ensure that they are able to do this, the effective date of those sections is set for June 30th of 2025. The bill does not change the number of positions where an FBI background check is required, or the requirement that agencies will still need to forward the fingerprints and accompanying documentation to the Criminal Records Unit within the Department of Safety for their review and ultimate transmittal to the FBI. Those are more complex issues, complex questions that deserve more and careful study. In Section 24 of the bill, we would establish a multi-agency task force to examine these and other issues. The task force will be chaired by the Commissioner of the Department of Safety and consist of representatives from the following agencies: Education, Revenue Administration, Health and Human Services, the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification, and the Lottery and Charitable Gaming Commission. The task force is also encouraged to consult with interested stakeholders such as the New Hampshire Municipal Association, the New Hampshire Association of Counties, New Hampshire Banking Department, New Hampshire School Administrators Association, and the New Hampshire State Commission on Aging. The task force will present its initial findings on or before November 1st of 2024, so that if there are any expenditures required to implement any of those findings, there is an opportunity to include them in the next biennium's budget and or opportunity to introduce any required legislation for the 2025 session. The task force's final report will be required on or before September 1st of 2025. When I first began to explore this issue, I thought, how hard can it be to reduce the turnaround time? All we need to do is scan fingerprints, set up a website, push a button, and send the request in and receive a yes or no answer back within minutes, if not seconds. Well, with the help of my friends at the Department of Safety, I learned it is not that simple. And shame on me for thinking that anything could be that simple. After talking with the Department of Safety Assistant Commissioner Edwards, State Police Captain Muzzy, and Criminal Records Unit Director Shea, I'm convinced that they understand how important it is to quickly and accurately obtain criminal record checks. My hope is that HB 1197 will offer them some quick fix additional tools to make that happen, while at the same time pulling together representatives of our state agencies who are the most invested in this process to investigate other longer-term solutions. To ensure that happens, I hope that you will recommend this bill as ought to pass. Thank you for your time, and I am happy to try to answer your questions, the key word being try.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions, Senator Whitley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. So I'm thinking about, sort of what I hear from my constituents, and the biggest is sort of the delays for parents who want to volunteer in schools, and then for childcare providers. We know that there's big vacancies in childcare providers, and we want to get those workers in there fast as possible, but in the safest way possible. Is this bill going to help with those issues?
I think it will. I mean, certainly with the child care providers, because it'll expand to the departments that have the agencies that have oversight for child care agencies, the ability to at least collect the fingerprints. And that's really all this is doing, is making that more available to people that want to work in those settings, so that information can get to the Department of Safety quicker. I think some of the people from the Department of Safety are here to testify. At least I hope they haven't run out yet. But they can kind of walk you through, what that would do in terms of turnaround time. But it should help.
Are there any further questions? I have a quick question. I think we all know that police are trained how to take fingerprints. It really is an art, because you've got to get the sides and it's just not something where I'll just slap your fingers here and we're good to go. Is there a requirement that the individuals be trained in order to take these fingerprints?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we delayed the implementation, the actual effective date of when new agencies can start taking fingerprints until June 30th of 2025, to give the Department of Safety the opportunity to train the people appropriately and make sure that they've got the right equipment.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, that is part of what we were thinking about.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Victor Muzzy.
Madam Chair, the criminal records unit supervisor, Chair, here we can say a few
Sure.
and or provide some perspective. Microphones.
Sure.
So, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity, honorable members of the committee. My name is Victor Muzzy. I'm a captain in the state police in charge of the Justice Information Bureau and oversee the criminal records unit. We also have here the Lieutenant Mary Benia, who is directly oversees the criminal records unit. But since we had worked with the representative in her absence at the time, I suppose it's prudent for the two of us to be up here to offer some perspective on this. And so I will thank Representative Munns for coming to the Department of Safety and saying, what would help you? And what you have before you is exactly what we had recommended or suggested with the addition of the task force, which we find to be probably very helpful. It's probably time to take a look at some of these FBI fingerprint-supported background checks and determine whether they're still appropriate, applicable, and whether there may be more out there that we should be considering. First and foremost, what I'll say, and I'll steal a little bit of Administrator Shea's thunder here, is for the record, there is no backlog right now. What we saw following COVID and the governor's order that was lifted requiring background checks or not requiring them during COVID, we saw just a tidal wave, I'll say, of folks that needed to be fingerprinted, needed to be processed, needed to be checked, if you will, and that created quite a logjam for us at the time. We have successfully worked through that, and it is a non-issue at the moment. Not to say it couldn't happen again for another reason, but for the record, there is no backlog at the moment relative to that. Another thing that I think is important to mention relative to Senator Whitley's comment about childcare, we process childcare fingerprints every day and have since June 14th, 2 years ago, for that purpose. Because we understand that people can't go to work if their kids don't have a place to go while they're working and things like that. So have made that our utmost priority for that reason and have seen some success there, have had numerous talks with the child care licensing unit. In fact, regular meetings with them to determine where are the problems, where are the issues, where are the log jams, so to speak. And if there is an issue, we encourage them to reach out directly and say, hey, we've been waiting for this person for X number of days. What's the issue? And working out those things on an individual basis to that effort. And it's been very successful. Just that time has not caught up with us. So this perceived backlog that was 2 years ago is no longer, but it takes that much time for it to get caught up. And so really at the onset of this initiative, our mindset was a couple of things. A, Christine and I spend a lot of time testifying before several committees, both in this building and the other, relative to criminal background checks and the difference between state criminal conviction checks and the FBI fingerprint-supported background check, which are two different processes. One is more, I won't say thorough, but a little bit more thorough because it involves more steps, and the other not so much. And so what I see this bill doing is starting to define those things and standardize those processes, because there seems to be some confusion between a state criminal conviction check and a fingerprint-supported background check. And so this is an effort, in my mind, to align everything the way that it should so that it's seamless and consistent, I guess, through the various statutes that it might apply to. Furthermore, I guess for the record, and I should have backed up a moment, when Representative Munns is correct. So all fingerprints, whether they're taken by a trained individual who's a non-law enforcement officer, have to come through Christine's office to be processed ahead of being submitted to the FBI. That's non-negotiable. There is no other way to do this. There is no shortcut or direct submission to the FBI. The FBI says if it doesn't come from the what do they call it? The State Identification Bureau, we don't accept it. And so that's the only way that these things get submitted. And yes, they typically come in from law enforcement officers. Also of note, which I think goes to your question, Madam Chair, is, how difficult is it to take fingerprints? And I would invite any interested members of the committee to come to headquarters if you have the opportunity to just see what it's like to collect prints on an APHIS machine. The machine, or the instrument, I should say, can be, it does take some training. It's relatively easy. It's relatively simple. We encourage this because inked fingerprints, which is, ink on paper, sometimes are smudged, sometimes aren't as clear. And so it's, while it requires some training, it's not insurmountable. You don't have to be a forensic scientist. It's not that cumbersome or that involved. And we have civilian staff that do it. So there's no reason why we couldn't train civilian staff at other state agencies certainly to perform this task. And that's why we've added the language in there as approved by the Commissioner of Safety, so that we have a list of people that we have trained, that we are comfortable and confident can do it correctly, and get us the results that we need in order to process the checks. In those submissions, the FBI, once we submit a fingerprint check, the FBI has 2 days to get back to us. So right now, within 4 or 5 days, anybody who has requested a check, those results have gone back to that state agency for them to continue on with their background check process. And what I think is important to note is what we do is provide records. We don't do background checks. We provide records to folks who conduct a full-blown background check and determine someone's suitability for employment. And I think that's an important distinction because oftentimes we get, we're waiting for the state, the background check hasn't come back. And it's not necessarily the state police. It might be the state agency is waiting for something or waiting for another entity to get back to them to complete that package. And so that's an important distinction for us because we're doing everything we can at safety to process those prints, get them submitted to the FBI, and then when we get the results back within 2 days, disseminating the record pursuant to that. And so it's important to note we are a small portion of that process, but oftentimes we get lumped into being, well, we're waiting for the state police. Well, not necessarily. In some instances, yes. And so ultimately we're in support of this bill for those reasons and the language. It makes it consistent. The task force, certainly. I hope that the commissioner doesn't name me the designee to chair the committee. That was my only hope, and I don't know that we can amend that now. However, it's probably the right time to look at those things and determine whether or not we need to add folks to that or take people out of that. And certainly the Department of Safety is happy to sort of aggregate those ideas and concerns and things and bring those forward. So I don't know if you have anything to add, but I think that is enough said for me.
I think you're good, and I think you covered it all.
Okay, very well. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Yeah, I kind of envision, and I'm thinking OPLC, where people need to be fingerprinted for licenses, that it would all be done at one time, that they go in, sign the paperwork, get their fingerprints taken, and off they go. And you just wait, hopefully 2 days, and, oh, good, here's your license, off you go. To just facilitate that process. And it could be anything from childcare to teachers, people that want to volunteer in schools, they usually require they have some sort of fingerprint done, those types of things, just to make it easier for individuals. And it'll be interesting to see what the result of the task force is.
Yeah, that's the intent. And the only other thing I can add is we have about 80 machines out there right now. We'll have 80 very soon when we implement another 10. We have one at every county jail with the exception of Hillsborough, but we're working on replacing the one that had been there for some time. And so all county jails will have them. Many police departments have them. A few SAUs, I think, also have a way to capture fingerprints. I think, was it Newington or some department, police department worked in concert with their SAU to actually buy a portable AFIS, and so that they can go to the school to fingerprint volunteers and other folks, but then also have the benefit of having it at the police department. So that was worked out, which was probably a good New Hampshire way of getting two jobs done in one process. So I think that's the intent, is that, and I think the other stumbling block, Senator Whitley, to your question about SAUs, is many of them are not on the portal, and so they're still taking inked prints, they're sending in cards, and that process takes longer than it probably should. And so we, the two of us, in concert with Diana Fenton from the Department of Education, pursuant to 189.13A, I think is required to conduct yearly training on background checks and things. So for the last year, and surprisingly it hasn't ramped up yet, maybe it will at the onset of the school years, we've gone out to SAU trainings, we have pushed our portal, we have pushed AFIS machine, getting folks fingerprinted on an AFIS machine and things like that to help speed that process up. So hopefully that's probably going to catch up with us soon, the success of doing that. Will start to catch up with us as well. And so I think that's probably the biggest issue is I'm in the Newfound Area School District, and I know our SAU does inked prints, and they weren't taking any more, parents. So I did my own and had somebody take my print so I know that's a stumbling block for some SAUs, is just simply relaying hard copies of things around and adding to the delay in the process. So
Okay,
And
thank
I
you.
will note, one of the things that we added as well is pop-up events where we bring out a portable live scan machine to different school districts. We've done that many times. We've done it for childcare where we've fingerprinted about 100 people in one shot. We bring 2 or 3 machines depending what they have. And so that's become more and more popular, but also that's taxing on resources on the other end. So that's where having machines at DHHS, OPLC will certainly help aid us in that too.
Great, terrific. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 1197? Right, seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing. We have concluded our business of the day. Everyone have a great evening.